Night, lightning flashes in the sky, and rain quietly pounds on the balcony. A young man lived in one of the apartments inside the dilapidated house. The quiet tapping of his fingers against the keyboard keys could be heard throughout the room as he played the game. He was very focused and exclaimed that this is their chance, go ahead. This boss's skills take a long time to recover. If they can't kill him in that amount of time, then he'll use his skills a second time, then they'll all die. The young man and his team fought against a huge level 102 Minotaur, whose health had almost dropped to 0. The young man's name was Luzun, and his game character used a skill and his sword was doused with a blue glow. After that, he rose into the air and a huge spiritual sword grew above him, which illuminated the entire location with a bright light. The Minotaur froze in place, as if enchanted by this spectacle, and after this a huge sword pierced his body and destroyed all his health. All players on the team received a system notification that the level 102 Minotaur had been defeated. The player named Xiaoming was delighted and told Luzun that he was the best. Another player named Xiao Gang said it was excellent. And the last player on the team named Xiao Hong supported their words and said that he is the strongest. After defeating the boss, Luzun took a can of soda and said that 2 more rounds and he would finally complete the order. He took off his headphones, and at the same time his sister came out of the bath, drying her hair with a towel, and told him to stop playing. He hadn't slept for 3 days. If he continues in the same spirit, his body simply won't be able to handle it. Luzun turned his head towards her and asked what could happen. He must complete the order quickly so that they have money for training because classes will begin soon. His sister wanted to object, but Luzun did not let her speak and waved his hand in front of him, telling her to come over. She came up and he, patting her on the head, said that he had thought of everything. When they saved up money for their studies, he would no longer have to earn money by playing computer games. Well, now let her go and read a book. His sister smiled slightly and agreed. After that she lay down on the bed behind her brother and began to read books. Luzun put the headphones back on and started playing again. His name is Luzun. He is a professional player. But more precisely, a professional booster. He accepts orders in the online store, helps people quickly upgrade their accounts, make equipment, and collect resources. For money, he is ready to do anything. Their parents died early, there was no savings left at home, and he was small and weak. He didn't know how to do anything except this. He logged into the game, registered a new account, and thought that this work was very tiring, but at least he and his sister had enough to live on. Now he has a small order. If he creates an account and completes difficult tasks for a beginner, he can sell it and earn quick money. In the game, he created a character with the sword class and confirmed the changes. The system showed that the character's appearance score reached 100% and Luzun was delighted. He laughed contentedly and said that a high appearance score would bring him a lot of money. But suddenly something happened. All his joy disappeared instantly when he tried to move his hand. His hand froze on the mouse, and he thought it was strange. He couldn't move his hand. After that, he tried to move his whole body, and his face darkened with fear. He could no longer move. His whole body was paralyzed, and as a result, he collapsed exhaustedly with his face on the keyboard, causing a loud crash. While he was falling, he thought that this could not be. His sister heard a loud sound and saw that he was lying in a strange position and began to call him, saying that he should not scare her like that. But Luzun was no longer in this world. Someone's question came from a completely different dimension. Did he think well? A white-haired man approached the table and asked, is he sure he wants to go like this? The black-haired man who played Go replied that it was not so. He put a black stone on the board and said that after making a move, there is no need to feel regrets. Meanwhile, Luzun woke up. He slowly opened his eyes and saw tree leaves and a blue sky in front of him. He immediately wondered where he was. He stood up from the grass, and the first thing he decided to do was look at his hands. He saw completely different clothes on himself and said that these were not his clothes. There was a river near the place where he woke up. He immediately went to the water's edge and looked at his reflection. On the surface of the water, he saw a young man with amber eyes that was similar to his original appearance, and he felt his face with his hand, saying that this face was so beautiful. But suddenly the clothes he was wearing seemed very familiar to him. He remembered how he created a new character, and how happy he was that a high assessment of his appearance would bring him a lot of money. Remembering all this, he thought, this place is similar to the account he just created. Is he really in the Changshuan world? Realizing all this, he exclaimed, what the hell? Is he in the game? What is going on? He's sleeping or what? From his screams, all the birds that were sitting in the trees flew into the sky at once, and Lu Xun began to pinch his face, saying that if this was a dream, then he needed to wake up quickly. He has no time to sleep because he has to feed his younger sister. He screamed, pinching his face hard again, but nothing happened. His cheek had already turned red, and he said that he pinched himself and woke up. Then is it true? He looked at the sky and asked loudly, did he create an account in the game and get here? There's clearly something wrong with this. He screamed loudly, and at the same moment a girl flashed through the forest, flying about her business. Lu Xun immediately looked in her direction, and she, moving her gaze to the side, also noticed him. Since Lu Xun had a charm of 10 units, in her eyes he was several times more handsome, and she inadvertently kept her gaze on him. She could not take her eyes off him and opened her mouth slightly in slight surprise and delight. After that, she stopped on the branch of a nearby tree and called out to him. Lu Xun immediately turned in her direction and, looking up at her in surprise, thought that this is a flying man, this is a game in this Anxia genre. So, first he needs to protect his life. She wouldn't attack an ordinary person like him. Instead, the girl smiled, looked at Lu Xun again, and said that he was truly a top-class specimen. Lu Xun's face turned red, and he thought, a specimen? He became embarrassed, covering his face with his hand, and thought, is it true? He imagined how a bunch of girls surrounded him, and he stood contentedly among them, and thought that they do not value some things. They wrap them up right away and throw them away, but they are precious. Wait, this is Tiangxuan. A picture immediately popped up in his head of how all these girls were leaving him, having leveled up to level 999, and he remained at 233. He is pleased to be such an example, but due to the fact that he only comes across low-level opponents, he has 233 level, and the rest went up to 999. He's just a springboard for other people to level up. He frowned and thought that this would not work. Is it possible, for the sake of fun, to become a springboard to achieve the goals of other people? If he does this, many will want to kill him. The girl tilted her head to the side, not understanding his reaction, and Lu Xun thought that she was probably one of those people who seems modest, and then it turns out that they watch all sorts of obscenities and all that. He turned his head to the side, covering his smile with his fist, and thought that he would look too. The girl smiled, seeing how quickly the emotions on his face changed, and thought that although the color of his face changed several times every couple of seconds, he was really handsome. If she starts pumping magic together with him, it will not be a loss to her. On the contrary, she will be able to make money from it. Suddenly she frowned and remembered the burning estate. Her parents were killed because they accidentally received a magic sword and cultivation methods. Since then, she has had a blood feud with those people, and her main goal is to become stronger and avenge her parents. Now paired pumping of magic and this heavy sword behind her wedding dress is her only hope. For paired magic training, she needed to find a handsome man. She jumped from the tree with the thought that she would kidnap him, but the danger was that the people who were pursuing her could catch up with them. After the jump, she approached Lu Xun, and he, backing away, told her not to come near him. He covered himself with his hands, as if he saw a very formidable opponent in front of him, and thought that she would now use force. He's level 1 trash now. He has nothing but a pretty face. But contrary to his expectations, the girl only sheepishly apologized and asked if she could ask him a question. Maybe he wants to go with her. Lu Xun's sense of danger immediately disappeared, and he thought that perhaps such a girl from a rich family could not kidnap people. He closed his eyes and laughed, feeling relieved, and the girl's face turned red as soon as she heard him laugh. Her eyes sparkled, she covered her mouth with her hand, and thought that he was even laughing beautifully. Lu Xun saw the girl's sympathy increasing and thought, what's going on? Does this help make you more likable? Lu Xun wearily put the back of his hand on his forehead and thought that in the old days, he tore his throat to gain the favor of the NPC. And now everything is so simple. Do they really only look at appearances? The girl's sympathy increased again. She was amazed by his beauty and thought that his jawline face, everything was so beautiful. Suddenly she felt something and, looking back, realized that they were catching up. Meanwhile, Lu Xun thoughtfully held his hand to his chin and thought, since he got her sympathy, can he tell her the truth? All he has to do is go to the nearest town and ask a master to train him. While he was thinking, this girl managed to quickly move behind him, and then wrapped her arm around him tighter, which Lu Xun clearly did not expect from her. After that, she flew further through the forest, holding him under her arm. and he still did not comprehend what was happening. Jumping with her from branch to branch, he realized that he could not move and thought that she simply had superhuman strength. Meanwhile, robbers arrived at the place where they met and began to look for the girl. The woman, along with the rest of the robbers, came out into the clearing, and she said that she could smell that woman. It turns out that she was here. The man next to her asked why he didn't hear her. She replied that she must have just run away, so they should give chase. Another man looked at the rest of the bandits and said that after they kill her, the magic sword and the secret of cultivation will be theirs. They all agreed, and after that they set off in pursuit of the girl. Meanwhile, she zigzagged through the trees with Lu Xun, and he, looking at her face, thought, "What's wrong with her? Haven't they passed here several times?" He narrowed his eyes, peered into her face, and thought, "Is this strange girl lost?" She was already tired from long jumps through the trees, and now she was clearly nervous, wandering through the forest. Lu Xun opened his mouth to ask something, but because they were moving quickly, gusts of wind flew into his mouth, opening it even further, and he was unable to say anything. After such an unsuccessful attempt, he decided to remain silent and look to the side, thinking that it seemed that he could not speak. While he was looking to the side, he noticed a huge sword on the girl's back and recognized it. The system reported the name of the sword, Wedding Dress, level yellow. Its level is too low, it is impossible to view the rest of the information. After that, Lu Xun cast a suspicious glance at the girl and thought that the yellow level sword was a treasure for ordinary people in Changchuan. Does this little girl have such a precious thing? If she has topographic cretinism, then why is she running so fast? Suddenly the thought flashed through his head that he was finished. This made him feel as if he was split into several parts and wondered if the girl was really being pursued. There are various types of equipment on the Changchuan continent, and weapons, depending on their level, are divided into the following types: ordinary, ritual, spiritual, divine, and magical. For convenience, people name weapons by color: white, yellow, blue, purple, orange. What a terrible setting. A wedding dress is a yellow ritual weapon. At the beginning of the game, the yellow attribute was the cherished dream of people all over the world. After all, who doesn't love yellow? While he was thinking about this, the girl landed on the ground and, seeing a fork in front of her, froze in place. Then Lu Xun asked, "What is it? Is she lost again?" After his words, the girl abruptly grabbed the sword behind her back and then pulled it out and swung it, displeasedly saying that she was not lost. Lu Xun was scared when he saw her waving her sword and asked what she was doing. Is she thinking about how to harm this innocent, handsome guy because she can't find the right path? She threw the sword into the air, spinning it, and asked who told him that she would harm him. With the help of the sword, she will determine the path. After her words, the sword fell onto the grass with a dull thud and indicated the direction. Lu Xun's eyes sparkled, and looking at the sword, he thought, "It turns out that we have to go where the end of the sword points." But contrary to his thoughts, the girl picked up the sword and ran in a completely different direction. Then Lu Xun made a dissatisfied face and thought, "But the hilt of the sword points in the other direction. Is she not playing by the rules? What the hell?" The girl jumped onto the tree and, pushing off the branch, ran further, and Lu Xun thought that no matter where she ran, they would still end up in the city. He glanced sideways at her chest and thought that he would ride the rest of the way as if on a beautiful horse. Time passed. The sun began to hide behind the mountains, lighting up the sky with pink hues. Finally, the girl was completely exhausted and stopped by a stone to catch her breath. Lu Xun, under her hand, looked at her blankly, and then she walked to the smooth stone and lifted Lu Xun above her to throw him onto the stone bed. Lu Xun became worried and asked her to let him go, and then the girl, seeing Lu Xun's handsome face and the curls of his blonde hair rising up from the fall, blushed and her eyes sparkled. She thought he was so handsome. After that, on shaking legs, despite her fatigue, she carefully placed Lu Xun on the stone and let him go. He sat down on a stone, and she took the sword off her back and sat next to Lu Xun, saying that they would rest a little. He asked, "Aren't they in a hurry?" She replied that now they need to rest, and then they will see what happens next. She sighed and thought that it looked like they had gotten rid of these people for a while. She looked at Lu Xun's calm face and thought, what kind of person is he? He doesn't even get angry or worry. She ran with him from those people, but he was not the least bit afraid. This is so strange. Lu Xun noticed her gaze on him and smiled slightly, saying that his name was Lu Xun. But he doesn't know her name. What's her name? He thought that since they were fleeing, he wanted to know where she, the female devil, came from. A female devil who captured him and made him her cultivator. The girl was a little embarrassed and immediately replied that her name was Lai Lai. She turned away from him abruptly and howled in her thoughts that it was obvious that she wanted to come up with a fake name to fool him. She actually thought of calling herself Niu Dazhuang. But why did he tell her his real name? Lu Xun didn't understand her reaction and thought Lai Lai. He had never heard this name in the main Changshuan branch. Maybe it's a trap related to the dragon boss. Could her enemies kill her soon? Meanwhile, Lai Lai had the power of a beautiful butterfly on her finger, and she, looking at the blue wings in fascination, thought that when she was little, she wanted to catch the cultivator. Now she has done it. But she still has to wear a large and yellow sword on her back. She could have died many times at a young age. For her, this life is not at all easy. Suddenly, Lu Xun's stomach growled loudly, dispelling all her thoughts. Lu Xun and Lai Lai looked at each other and silence fell between them. They both looked at each other awkwardly, and Lu Xun thought that this sudden silence scared him. After that, Lai Lai put her hand under the decorative flower on her clothes, and Lu Xun, seeing her take out some kind of package, thought, what is she going to do? She pulled out a package and then unwrapped it, showing him the cake and saying that she had grabbed something from home. Will he eat it? He looked at the cake in surprise, and then looked at her embarrassed face and thought that it turned out that she was not a devil woman at all. He slowly took the cake from her hands, and as soon as he did this, her stomach growled loudly. There was silence between them again, and after that Lu Xun asked, is there only one piece here? He broke the cake and said that then they would divide it in half. He handed her half a cake with a smile and told her to take it, and only one thought flashed in Lai Lai's head, that he was so handsome. Suddenly the voice of robbers was heard from the forest. The woman shouted that it was the smell of that woman. She smelled it again. The man asked where. Why doesn't he feel anything? The woman replied that she was definitely somewhere nearby. They need to quickly find her and kill her. Lu Xun and Lai Lai immediately became wary and looked deep into the forest, and the woman shouted that if they finished her off, the Jai Palace would be destroyed and the treasures would become theirs. Immediately after this, Lai Lai quickly stuffed a flatbread into Lu Xun's mouth, and before he could chew it, he wanted to say something, but Lai Lai knocked him to the ground and told him not to talk. They both fell to the ground, hiding behind the bushes, and Lu Xun mumbled something while Lai Lai covered his mouth. She fell on top of him and blushed a little, and Lu Xun, trying to swallow a dry cake, asked if she had water. He thought that if girls in the 22nd century heard this, they would ask, where? Lai Lai got off Lu Xun and took out a jug, thinking that she would use it for drinking. But will he drink from this jug? She imagined him greedily drinking water from the neck of her jug, and streams of water flowing from the corners of his mouth and pouring down his chin. She blushed even more, handing him the jug, and thought, isn't this an indirect kiss? Contrary to her expectations, Lu Xun simply uncorked the jug and, without touching the neck of the vessel with his lips, poured the water into his mouth. Lai Lai's hand was still trembling with excitement, and seeing him drink water, she thought, why is she a little disappointed? Meanwhile, the robbers came to the place where they had just rested. The woman said it was here. Her smell was too strong. The bald man asked her, is it here? How can she feel this? He does not understand. Then the guy asked what kind of empty chatter. They need to find it, then the treasure will be theirs. Lu Xun and Lai Lai looked out from behind the bushes, and she turned her gaze to her companion, putting her index finger to her lips and hissed quietly. Lu Xun thought that if they were discovered, then everything would be over. He'd probably have to use his first resurrection coin here and be considered her boyfriend. While they were watching their pursuers, a chilling wind passed behind their backs and Lu Xun felt it. He looked at his pursuers again and shivered from the cold, thinking that this account was not just strange, there were also spirits here. Suddenly, the woman sharply pointed her finger in the direction where they were hiding and said that the girl's smell was coming from there. She was sure of it. They began to approach the bushes and Lai Lai hid better. Tears appeared in her eyes. She clenched her hand into a fist and thought that she would die. But since she would die, she must kill at least one. She thought about her parents, but suddenly Lu Xun interrupted these thoughts. He abruptly covered her mouth with his hand, not allowing her to even squeak, and she looked up at him in surprise. He put his finger to his lips and told her to be quiet. She shouldn't even breathe. He thought that she gave him half a cake, and he would give her the salvation of her life. After all, as a professional Changshuan player, he has hundreds of accounts. and the breath of the chilling wind is very familiar to him. While the pursuers were approaching, alien energy began to soar in the air, and the guy said that there was some strange smell here. The bald man asked, did he feel it again? The guy replied that no matter what happens, they must cope with everything. Suddenly, this dark energy swirled in a huge vortex in front of them, which made them stop. From this energy, the appearance of a horned creature began to form. The energy continued to circle around this creature, and then dissipated, and a very cute spirit appeared before the robbers with an inscription on its forehead that it was a spirit. The robbers fell silent, looking at this huge spirit incomprehensibly, and the woman asked what kind of strange things were happening here. The bald man asked what they would do with him. After that, they immediately took out their weapons, and someone shouted that they would kill him. They ran towards the spirit, and the guy shouted that he needed to act. The spirit saw that they were running towards him, and his eyes sparkled, and then he let out a joyful cry. Immediately after this, he released his long tongue from his mouth and pierced all the robbers with it at the same time. Lai Lai, whose mouth was still covered by Luzon, was horrified by this sight and froze in place. Meanwhile, the spirit pulled out its tongue from the robbers' bodies, leaving huge holes in them, and Luzon thought that this kid, as expected, still bears the nickname of the Rookie Killer, and it fully justifies his reputation. After killing the robbers, the spirit hurried into the forest, and Luzon stopped covering Lai Lai's mouth. She breathed out a sigh of relief and asked what was going on here. Luzon laughed and replied that something was good. Lai Lai was afraid of his reaction and thought that he just needed to find the right way, because even a 3-year-old child could hit this spirit. After that, he stood up, looked out of the bushes, and Lai Lai exclaimed, "What is he doing? He's still here." Suddenly, the spirit stopped, smelling the smell emanating from Luzon, and he thought that for him, as an experienced booster, he was just a moving bag of experience. Realizing that there was someone here, the spirit immediately turned around and looked in their direction with a cute muzzle, making a joyful sound. Lai Lai was very scared and exclaimed that they were finished. He had discovered them. Immediately after this, the spirit stuck out its tongue and rushed towards them, without ceasing to make joyful sounds. Out of fear, Lai Lai covered her eyes with her hands and screamed, saying that he was coming. Then Luzon turned slightly towards her and said with a smile that she should hide and hold her breath. After that, he jumped out of hiding towards the spirit, who was ready to joyfully meet him with her tongue, and confidently said that now let her enjoy the show. Lai Lai looked after him and thought, does he really want to die and help her cultivate? She worriedly told him after him that she didn't want him to sacrifice himself for her. Let him run faster. He's a monster. Luzon looked at her and told her not to be afraid. This is not a monster. After that, he smiled creepily and said that it was a spirit. Seeing his eerie face against the backdrop of the huge eyes of the spirit, she completely fell into wild fear and with tears in her eyes said that this thing was a spirit. After that, she lost consciousness from horror and the realization that it was a spirit. She fell to the ground, drooling, and Luzon looked at her and asked, has it finally dawned on her? Although unlikely. He looked at the spirit again and extended one leg forward to strike, saying that the games are over, it's time to fight. Suddenly, the spirit stopped abruptly and Luzon looked at his reaction with a satisfied smile. The spirit froze in place, losing Luzon from sight, and he, towering over him, thought that he was just a gift for a beginner. After that, he sharply approached the spirit, before which he extended his 2 middle fingers forward and stuck them into the eyes of the spirit, thinking that of course he had killed him not 1,000 times, but already 998. The poor spirit screamed in pain, feeling very strong pressure on his eyes from the fingers of Luzon. After this, the spirit's health rapidly dropped to 0, and it dissipated, scattering dark energy throughout the area. The system reported that he killed the mountain spirit and received 666 experience points. After that, Luzon landed on the ground next to Lai Lai, and looking at the system window, thought that killing evil spirits also gives experience. He should check the character panel. On the character panel, he saw that his first level could be increased. His strength, speed, agility reached only 1 unit, and no martial arts at all. After looking at his characteristics, Luzon thought that of course, this is a new account, but even 666 points can increase the level. But he doesn't have any martial arts skills. He needs to quickly find a martial arts school and learn the techniques. After that, he sat down next to Lai Lai, who was lying unconscious on the ground, and looking at her chest, thought that although she was young, her mountain peaks rose high. He touched her face with his finger and told her to wake up, everything is fine. Suddenly he thought, what is he thinking about? This is an innocent girl. He imagined a rather curvy woman in his head and thought that a real man should be brave enough to seduce a woman. A cold and fragrant lady in black stockings is what a man needs. After a few seconds, Lai opened her eyes and, seeing Luzon above her, asked, is it all over? What's with this thing? She saw Luzon extend his hand to her and answer with a slight smile that he had completely figured it out. The evening rays of the sun illuminated his face, and yellow fallen leaves flew around him. She extended her hand to him in response, and then stood up sharply and with sparkling eyes asked, did he figure it out? Luzon quickly pulled away from her and thought that this girl seemed to like him too much. He waved his hand and headed into the clearing, saying that they weren't finished yet, so let her follow him. With eyes aglow from his beauty, she asked where he wanted to go. He looked at the things that were left from the robbers and replied that of course he wanted to pick up the equipment. Does it seem cheap? He needs a little, and she can keep the rest. Lai looked at the clearing where various things were scattered and saw that there was only an ordinary long sword, 97 liangs of silver, a robe, a meditating robe of an immortal, and a fragile dagger. Seeing all these treasures, only gold coins began to be reflected in her eyes, and she quickly ran towards them, thanking Luzon. He looked after her and remained silent, and after that time passed. Luzon picked up the weapon and the book, and then began to read it and said that this is a rare book of the Hawk's Will. Jianghu's techniques are written here. There are some good techniques here, but the name is strange. Lai, who had attached several more swords to her back, replied with a smile that it is difficult to start learning techniques without the guidance of a teacher. Let him put this book aside, maybe he can sell it at a good price. A system window appeared in front of Luzon, asking if he wanted to study this. He agreed around the house that an extra skill wouldn't hurt. Of course he'd learn it. After confirmation, he was surrounded by streams of light blue energy, and Lai looked at him in surprise. After a few seconds, Luzon suddenly opened his eyes, feeling a new strength in himself. Powerful energy began to emanate from his finger, and then the system window showed that he had learned the Will of the Hawk introduction. Lai's sympathy immediately began to grow rapidly, and she thought with admiration that he had looked at the book just once and had already studied everything. Seems to be a martial arts genius that appears once every 100 years. Luzon moved away from her a little, noticing that her sympathy was growing again, and thought that her sympathy was growing too quickly. What if her sympathy level gets too high and she can't control it? He imagined her stalking him with possessed eyes and telling him to cultivate with her. Faster, they will have pair cultivation. She would continue to pursue him and laugh madly, saying that she liked him. Having imagined all this, he thought that this was too much. He lowered his wary and dissatisfied gaze at Lai, with the thought that if it came to something more, he would not be able to defend himself even with the help of the learned techniques. Or, on the contrary, will it attract her even more? Lai noticed his gaze and asked a little upset why he was looking at her like that. Luzon immediately looked away from her and answered uncertainly that he was not looking. Time passed, they continued on their way, and Lai said that it was strange that he did not ask her why she was being pursued. Then Luzon looked at her uncertainly and asked because she catches people forcing them to become their cultivators. These words made her angry and thought that he was her only cultivator. She stopped and then displeasedly called out to Luzon and wanted to say something, but saw how he looked at her with an incomprehensible look, how his hair fluttered with a light breath of wind, and she immediately covered her mouth with delight, thinking that she would not argue with him. For the sake of this face she is ready to endure. Suddenly Luzon pointed his finger forward and told her to forget about it, let her look there. She followed his finger and saw a small town ahead. Luzon smiled and said that this is a county town. Immediately after this, Lai grabbed him by the collar, and then joyfully ran towards the city and said how well she knew the terrain. She just wanted to get to Kinmu County. A few minutes later, they reached the main gate and Lai, still holding Luzon by her clothes, stopped at the entrance to the city, looking at the sign with the name of the county. Luzon turned around and smiled when he read that the sign said that this was Y County. He is very familiar with this newcomer village. They entered the city, and he thought that he asked one girl. She said that now in Tiancheng the year is 3D 1997, but during the open testing of the game, it was 4000. That is, he ended up here 3 years before the opening of the beta version of the game. He has been revived in Y County about 100 times, so he knows this place very well. Lai Lai said embarrassedly that they first need to find a hotel to stay. She thought that she had not washed for a long time. How should I tell her this? 10 minutes later, they reached the hotel and Lu Zun, looking at the name sign, said that it was here. This is a good hotel, the quality is good, and the price is reasonable. Lai Lai looked at him with a smile and thought, does he care about her that much? The owner of the inn came out to them and motioned for them to come in, asking if they were just stopping by for a while or if they wanted to stay with them. Lu Zun replied that of course they want to stay, they need a room. They headed inside, and the hotel owner asked with a smile whether they should have 2 rooms or 1. Lu Zun asked Lai Lai what she thought about it. She covered her mouth in embarrassment and then awkwardly raised her hand, showing 1 finger and saying 1 room. Then Lu Zun abruptly grabbed Lai Lai's hand and said that they needed 2 rooms. Lai Lai's face became very red with embarrassment, and the innkeeper, pointing to the stairs to the 2nd floor, said that he would then welcome them to the hotel. They headed towards the stairs, and Lu Zun, releasing Lai Lai, said displeasedly that if they had rented 1 room, there would have been an error 404. Maybe she would stop pestering him. She calmly asked, why? Then Lu Zun punched her on the top of her head and asked, can she be a little more serious? Meanwhile, a woman entered the hotel and asked the owner if there was a free room. Lu Zun recognized her voice and turned around. He saw a plump woman with a sword at the entrance who said that she wanted to move in. When he saw her, his eyes sparkled with admiration, and he thought that this was Mirong Yan, the head of the newcomer village of Kinmu County, the leader of the Daemon School, and besides, she had level 985. Lu Zun was not the only one who was surprised by her arrival. One of the guests who was sitting at the table drinking alcohol turned around sharply when he saw this woman, and the innkeeper asked Mirong Yan to wait. Now he would take these 2 guests upstairs, and then immediately return to her. After that, she sat down at the nearest table and began to wait, and the innkeeper took Lu Zun and Lai Lai to the 2nd floor. While they were climbing, Lu Zun thought that this was interesting, but her authority was not enough for her to become his mentor. Meanwhile, Mirong Yan decided to take a closer look at the new guests who had just checked in. She saw a sword called a wedding dress on Lai Lai's back and stared at her, narrowing her eyes a little. Time passed. Lu Zun lay in his room on the bed and thought that he had suddenly been reborn in this world, but he managed to buy insurance so that after his death, his sister should live without worries. He imagined her crying and thought that she must be very sad. From this thought, he himself began to cry and said that she needed to be strong, because in the future she would be left alone, and he must be strong. Suddenly, there was a creak of the door, and he shuddered. Lai Lai looked into his room and said that she was going to sell these weapons. Will he go with her? Lu Zun sat on the bed and asked, is she afraid that he will run away while she is selling this? He closed his eyes, and with a smile told her not to worry, he wouldn't run away, so let her go alone. He thought that he had nowhere to run anyway. Lai Lai went into his room and said with a smile that she had figured it out. This is her first time going there, so she doesn't yet know what to do. What if the man from the pawn shop deceives her? She leaned towards his face and said that let him go with her, he would help her, and they would split the money in half. Does he agree to this? He moved slightly closer to her face, making her blush, and said that he could go with her, but he didn't need her money. Let her just do something for him. Lai Lai immediately became worried and, hugging herself with her arms, exclaimed, what? Lu Zun slowly got out of bed and, hugging Lai Lai, said that she should lift her veil and show him her face. She embarrassedly pushed him away from her and exclaimed that she needed to comb her hair and wash her face first. After that, she embarrassedly ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her, and Lu Zun said that he just wanted to joke. He thought that this veil is so thin, can it really hide something? No one will ever guess what's on the girls' minds. A moment later, footsteps separated outside the door, and Lai Lai hesitantly said that she had returned. Lu Zun walked to the door and opened it, looking at Lai Lai, who was standing hesitantly in the passage. She went inside, and he saw her excited face without a veil. She raised her hand to her chest and asked, he hasn't changed his mind, has he? He replied that this was not so. But suddenly he is sent to prison, then he will lose 3 years. She asked incomprehensibly, will they go to jail? What does it mean? He pointed his finger at her and said that she was young. She didn't need to look for cultivators. She would still have many opportunities to become stronger. He tiredly covered his face with his palm and, opening one eye, looked at her and thought that she had the face of a child, but was shaped like an adult. If they go out into the city, people will say that she is a primary school student. Then he will definitely be imprisoned. Lai Lai displeasedly put her hands on her waist and chuckled indignantly, saying that she was not as small as he thought. Actually, she's already quite old. Suddenly, someone's silhouette appeared behind her behind the door, and there was a knock. Lai Lai immediately grabbed her sword and said that it was so easy to get in here, she didn't notice this person. If this is an enemy, then she probably won't be able to cope with him. Lu Xun looked at the silhouette that was hiding behind the door, and the system reported that it was Murong Yan, level unknown. Note, there appears to be no malicious intent. Lu Xun thought, Murong Yan, what is she doing here? He walked towards the door with his hands outstretched, and Lai Lai, noticing this, asked what he was doing. He opened the doors, sparkling with his handsome face, and asked what she wanted here. Murong Yan was slightly taken aback when she saw his face, and then turned her gaze to Lai Lai standing behind him and replied that it was nothing. After that, she turned around and waved her hand, saying that she was in the wrong room. While she was leaving, she turned around slightly and thought that the guy who opened the door for her had struck her with something. Did she really lack determination? After she left, Lu Xun closed the doors and Lai Lai asked, did she leave? He confirmed her words and said that she was definitely not in the wrong room. She didn't understand why he decided that way and asked what he was talking about. He turned his gaze to her and said, she probably saw the man who was at the wrong door. Would such a person knock? This girl clearly had a motive. She glanced at her right before she walked away. He wanted to say something else, but Lai Lai interrupted him and asked in surprise, did she look at her? She immediately wrapped her arms around herself and embarrassedly said that she should not have taken off the veil. After that, Lu Xun looked at her sword, and the system reported that this sword was distracting the attention of low-level masters. Seeing this, he smiled slightly and closed his eyes, thinking that he knew it. This is the Changshuan world he knows. The world of Changshuan is a place dominated by cultivators. Of course, murder, treasure theft, the struggle between good and evil, all this is an integral part of the world of cultivators. This happens everywhere. But it's actually not that bad. Many cultivators are conscientious, help other people, and contribute in every possible way to reconciliation. The cultivators in this world have the power of the Celestials, and they are willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of ordinary people. Noble people are ready to fight injustice and guide others to the righteous path. He feels comfortable in this world. Thanks to this trick, masters whose level is lower than Murong Yan will not be able to understand that this is a magic weapon, and therefore they will not have the intention of stealing it. While he was thinking, looking at Lai Lai, she just stood there and waited for what he would say. At one point she grabbed his hand and said that she didn't understand what he was thinking about now, but they needed to quickly go to the pawn shop. They quickly ran out of the hotel, and she said that he had promised her. While they were running, Lai Lai turned around, looking at Lu Xun with a wide smile, and he ran after her and thought that protecting the weak is the main goal of cultivators in the Tiantian world. Well, since Murong Yan appeared here, then one of the good initial quests of the Tiantian world is located here. He turned around, looking at the name of the hotel, and thought that he just needed to wait for the opportunity, and then he could adjust this world to himself. Time passed, people were wandering on one of the streets of the city, some were transporting goods, some were just sitting at the table and relaxing. Lai Lai came out of the pawn shop with Lu Xun and happily said that she now has so much money that they can forget about hunger. Lu Xun asked with a smile, since she has so much money, maybe she could invite him to dinner? She happily replied that of course they would go to eat. He can eat whatever he wants, don't be shy. With two, no, with 1 silver piece he can eat. Lu Xun gave her a thumbs up with a wry smile and said that she was very generous. They walked down the street and he asked, did she notice anything strange? She looked up at him with a blank look and asked what he was talking about. Then he asked if the woman who came to see them today seemed suspicious to her. Lai Lai suddenly remembered this and said that she wanted to tell him about it, but forgot. After a short pause, she asked, what was suspicious about it? Lu Xun remained silent and thought that her breasts had grown, but her brain seemed to have not. It was already dark outside. They returned to the hotel and sat down at the table to discuss everything. Lu Xun told Lai Lai about Murong Yan, and she suddenly jumped up from her chair and exclaimed loudly, is that woman a cultivator? Lu Xun cleared his ear with his finger in displeasure and asked, could she not scream so loudly? He almost went deaf. This is a good opportunity for them, so it's better for them not to stand out. Lai Lai was delighted, approaching him with sparkling eyes and asked how he knew this. He pointed to her sword lying on the table and told her to look here. Did she notice anything? She bent over the sword and began to peer closely at it, deep in thought. After some thought, she turned her blank gaze to Luzon and asked what she should have noticed. He remained silent and thought, did she notice something? Or didn't you notice? The question is simple. Without waiting for her answer, he tiredly covered his face with his palm and said that this was a trick for ordinary people. In their eyes, it was an unremarkable weapon. Lai Lai slammed her fist into her palm and said enthusiastically that she understood. If she asks that woman to be a student, then no one will dare to offend her, and she will be able to avenge her parents. Her eyes lit up with delight, and she said that he was so cool he could notice any little thing. He removed his hand from his face and replied that it does not matter. The only important thing is whether the master chooses it or not. Suddenly, a man's voice was heard outside the window, saying that on the evening of the 15th of the first lunar month, no one should leave the house, the gates of hell would open, they should not ask about life or death. He repeated the announcement again, and Luzon and Lai Lai went to the window to find out what was the matter. They looked down and saw the men below scattering paper money and announcing the opening of the gates of hell. Looking at this procession, Luzon said that it turns out that today is the festival of hungry ghosts. Immediately after this, Lai Lai quickly walked away from the window, looking upset. She pressed her hands to her chest and tears appeared in her eyes. She asked, so her parents can reincarnate. Luzon looked again at the street where the paper money was flying and said that goodness is rewarded. Lai Lai sadly sat down at the table and began to cry, saying that good people really do receive good things in return. Suddenly it started to rain outside. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. Luzon looked at how people on the street were rushing to their homes to hide from the rain and thought that he didn't know for sure, but for sure good things were returning. At least his sister got the insurance money, and when she graduates from university, she won't want for anything. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Lai Lai's alarming voice. She called out to him and told him to look. He immediately turned around and went to Lai Lai, who in surprise pointed her finger at the sword trembling on the table and began to hurry him. Luzon saw that the weapon was emitting a strong aura and was vibrating. Then the system reported that the magic sword was vibrating. The spirits were raging. This was a warning. Danger is coming. A smile appeared on his face, and he thought that if he was not mistaken, then here was their chance. He took Lai Lai by the hand and led her to the exit, saying that she should come with him. It was very beautiful outside. They would take the opportunity. She followed him and asked what was beautiful there. In response, his face lit up with an eerie smile, and he said that there would be a lot of devilry there tonight. He continued to look at her with such an expression on his face, and she got scared, which caused tears to appear in her eyes. They looked out the window, and Luzon told her to look. There are so many spirits here. A whole crowd of different spirits were flying down the street and looking at them. Luzon thought that the spirits of the Changshuan world are different from the spirits in the real world. They are born from many grievances and not because of one. The Hungry Ghost Festival is a spirit slaying competition. The more spirits he kills, the more experience he will gain. Therefore, a person who has rich experience in killing spirits feels like a fish in water. He pulled Lai Lai towards the exit of the room and said that they should go there together. Poor Lai Lai started foaming at the mouth again and fainted at the mere mention of perfume. He asked, is she afraid? But they need to take advantage of the opportunity today, so they have to go, even if she doesn't want to. He threw her over his shoulder and began to walk down the stairs, thinking that before they left, he should make sure that she was really there. Outside the hotel, you could hear the ringing laughter of a girl who was scattering all the spirits in all directions and shouting that this was great. Luzon was happy to hear that laughter and thought that of course she was there. His premonition did not let him down. All he needed was for Murong Yan to appear, then she would appear. With a satisfied smile, he easily went down to the first floor and thought that this was the coolest initial quest. He couldn't make mistakes. At this moment, Lai Lai came to her senses and slowly opened her eyes, asking what is it. Suddenly she realized that Luzon was holding her and exclaimed, where is he taking her? He replied that they were going to the cultivator to ask to become disciples. Hearing this, she resolutely clenched her hands into fists and thought that finding the cultivator and going to his disciples was her only chance. She should cheer up. She won't be a coward again, ever. They saw Murong Yan sitting at the table and watching the spirits scatter in all directions. Then Lai Lai joyfully exclaimed that she was here. She deserves the title of cultivator. When the spirits are so rampant, she just sits and guards the gates to protect the common people. Hearing that someone had come, Murong Yan turned around, snapping seeds, and asked, "What do they want here?" Lai Lai realized that she was just enjoying the spectacle and asked in disappointment, "Is she just cracking the seeds?" At this time, Lu Zun looked admiringly at the carnage and quietly said that it was her. All the spirits were again scattered in all directions, and those who survived headed towards their offender. In the very center of the crowd of spirits, a girl in a red and white robe was raging. She was jumping on the heads of the spirits, laughing and saying that she was having so much fun. But suddenly she noticed someone looking at her, and her gaze fell on Lu Zun. He alone shone in the hall of the night hotel. Even Lai Lai closed her eyes from the radiance that came from him and cursed. The girl saw Lu Zun's beautiful face looking at her with a slight smile, and wondered in surprise, where did he come from here? While she was looking at him in fascination, a spirit suddenly attacked her from behind. He tore the ribbons on her hair, and a few strands on the sides fell down, revealing the cat ears on her head. Feeling this, she began to slowly boil with rage, and all the spirits around her froze in place, and the spirit that tore her ribbons realized that he had done it in vain. After that, the girl became completely angry and shouted in rage that they were all cowards. She took out 2 daggers that glowed with red energy and slowly rose into the air, barely containing her rage. After that, she still could not restrain herself, and, having struck many blows at the crowd of spirits, shouted that she would chop them all into pieces. Now she was no longer just playing, jumping over their heads, but mercilessly killing everyone in her path. Meanwhile, Lu Zun stood by the pillar with tears in his eyes and watched as she killed the spirits. He sighed in frustration and thought that there was so much experience here, and it was still not his. After a couple of movements of the cat girl, only lights remained from the crowd of spirits, and the surviving spirits crowded together and began to tremble with fear. Lu Zun thought that she had destroyed the ghosts with one blade. He had never seen anything like this even at level 30. This girl must have started at level 40. Suddenly the girl called out to Lu Zun and said that she had been looking at her for so long. At her sudden call, he shuddered, and then she angrily stepped towards him and stopped in front of him, pointed her finger at him, and said that he should not think that she had not noticed it. Lu Zun looked down at her and remained silent. She was waist high to him, but she continued to look fiercely and point her finger at him. Silence fell between them. I don't want to be inferior to him in height. She flew high above him and closed her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. Then she smiled and, calling Lu Zun a mortal, said that she had been looking for a beautiful horse for a long time. Maybe he wants to become one. Lu Zun looked at her and thought that she was a so-called demon with enlightened spiritual wisdom, the same as those spoken about in fairy tales. Having accidentally released spiritual wisdom within them, they fed on the power of the sun and moon to improve their body and spirit. The energy of the sun and moon was not very well mastered, so they had to get up at dawn. Their path of practice is much more difficult, and the time they spend on cultivation is much longer. It takes tens, hundreds of years to achieve results. For such a long time, they constantly became better, and finally became the support of the gods. Lu Zun tilted his head to the side and asked, "Riding horse?" He thought it was such a rarity to use a human as a mount. He imagined a bunch of girls in his head and thought that in general this was wrong, because some pay in full, while others pay practically nothing. Different types of transport immediately popped up in his head, and he thought that it was all about the riding horse. The cat girl looked at Lu Zun confidently and said that it should be a great honor for him to carry Mountain. Hearing her name, Lu Zun grinned and thought that this was a great monster. People remember the image of a girl with cat ears. Countless sand sculptures ran after her. Even if someone wants to carry it on themselves, it's definitely not him. The smile disappeared from her face, and Murong Yan, bowing to Mountain, called her madam and asked, "Isn't this against the rules?" Lai Lai exclaimed in surprise, "Madam, she's so small." Mountain ignored her, and then sat on Murong Yan's shoulder and said that they have so many rules. Why not break at least one? Murong Yan replied that she could say whatever she wanted, but she couldn't let the elders hear it. Mountain raised her chin and asked, who should she be afraid of? And anyway, these are the words of her second eldest sister, so she will bear all the consequences. Murong Yan only smiled in response, and then Mountain turned to Lu Zun and asked, so what about her proposal? She will give him whatever he wants, be it a weapon or a panacea that has no drawbacks. Lai Lai lowered her head, looking at Lu Zun upset and wondering, will he really agree to this? He thoughtfully raised his hand to his chin, and she saw that a smile appeared on his face. This smile can charm anyone. It means that an idea has appeared in his head. Seeing his beautiful face, Lai Lai covered her mouth with her hand, Mountain Bay's cat-like pupils widened, and Murong Yan opened her mouth in surprise. They all thought, how can such a beautiful person even exist? Finally, Lu Xun removed his hand from his face and asked Mountain Bay, is she strong? She lifted her chin as if he had asked an obvious question and answered that it was natural. She came here to get rid of the Ghost King. He had only recently seen 100 of them, and they had destroyed them all. Then Lu Xun asked, are her people also very powerful? He put on an innocent face and said that then he wanted to see for himself. Despite his face, in his heart he was jubilant. He thought that he would have a wonderful opportunity to get into her family. Mountain Bay frowned and said that she didn't like people who asked too many questions. Then Lu Xun took advantage of his charm and his eyes sparkled, his eyebrows arched slightly sadly, and Mountain Bay's face blushed at the sight of such a handsome man. The other girls also blushed, and Mountain Bay, without thinking twice, exclaimed that she agreed. After that, Lu Xun elbowed Lai Lai's hand and said that it was her turn now. Let her speak quickly, they must accept her as a student. Lai Lai looked up at him with a confused look. She began to get very worried and tried to say something, but couldn't. Lu Xun looked at her attempts and, rolling his eyes in displeasure, thought that he would have to take it upon himself. Luckily, he's done a lot of haggling before, so everything should go fine. He said that this girl just had an incredibly tragic experience. The story shocked the world. He continued to tell her life story, about her parents and about revenge, while actively gesturing with his hands. Finally, he cried and, wiping his tears with his hand, said that he was so sad that tears flowed from his eyes. After listening to his story, Mountain Bay's ears dropped, and she looked at Lai Lai with a frustrated look. Murong Yan also looked at her with sympathy and asked, so this is it. Even Lai Lai herself burst into tears at Lu Xun's story and, covering her mouth with her hand, looked at Lu Xun with eyes shining from tears and asked, is she really that unhappy? He remained silent, looking at her with a dissatisfied look and shouted in his thoughts that she should be more serious. Then he put his hand on the back of her head and thought that this was the last step. She needs to bow in order to be accepted as a disciple. He bowed sharply, pressing on the back of Lai Lai's head, but she did not move because she was stronger. This made Lu Xun's bones crunch loudly, cold sweat appeared on his face, and he, continuing to bow with an awkward smile, thought that it seemed that he would die right here from shame. Finally, Lai Lai caught Lu Xun's thought and bowed, saying that the lady eliminated the evil spirits to pay tribute to the heavens, and was able to apply the blinding method to her sword. She thinks that the people in front of her must be members of the righteous immortal sect. She looked up at them with a determined look and said that was why she would like to join the immortals. Lu Xun, satisfied with her words, gave her a thumbs up and said that this was not bad. In such a short time she had learned to answer. Wait, did she just say that these two are from the immortal sect? Suddenly Mountain Bay laughed loudly, hitting Murong Yan on the top of her head with laughter. Lai Lai asked in surprise, what happened? Mountain Bay crossed her legs and pointed her finger at herself with a smile and said that she was from the Mozong demon sect. After these words, Lai Lai immediately grabbed her head and exclaimed, demon sect? Demon. She thought that the name itself was full of danger. But they helped, which is not at all like a demon sect. She looked at Lu Xun and thought, anyway, what should she do? Lu Xun noticed her gaze on him and nodded confidently to her. She nodded back at him and thought that when he nodded, she understood everything. Does that mean she can still act? After that, she suddenly fell to the ground, bowed her head to Mountain Bay, and said that she expressed her respect to them. Mountain Bay was very surprised by her decision and was a little taken aback. Then she grinned, showing her cat fangs, and said that let her just try in the future to renege on her words. Now they will look at her improvement skills. Murong Yan waved her hand and told Lai Lai to get up. She immediately looked up at her and said that she understood. After that, she stood up and Murong Yan reached out to her forehead with 2 fingers and said that she should relax and not think about anything, she would just explore her. Lai Lai agreed, closing her eyes, and after that, Murong Yan touched her and circles began to emanate from her, showing her strength. Mountain Bay began to read the circles and even raised her head to look at the last one. She counted us as many as 8 circles and was very surprised, and then nodded and said with a smile that she had only 1 circle less than her. It will make real jade. Luzon thoughtfully raised his hand to his chin and thought that this little girl was clearly not telling something, wasn't she? 8 circles is real talent. Lai Lai was glad that Mountain Bay recognized her strength and asked, so, is she accepted? Mirong Yan smiled at her and replied that she passed easily. But then she will have to work a lot. Lai Lai clenched her fists happily and replied that this was great. After testing her abilities, Mirong Yan approached Luzon and Mountain Bay wondered, if this girl has 8 circles, then how many does he have? Mirong Yan reached out to Luzon's forehead and told him not to worry with a smile. When she touched his forehead, he asked, is it possible to be nervous here? All the girls froze in anticipation, waiting to see the strength of Luzon, which seemed very attractive to them, and finally a glow from the circle appeared. In an instant, 1 circle appeared around Luzon, and they began to wait for the others to appear. But then nothing happened, and they, looking at 1 single circle above Luzon's head, asked in disappointment just one. Luzon was also disappointed and thought that he had almost forgotten about it. He remembered how he pumped all the points into the character's beauty and, covering his face with his palm, thought that he had spent everything on charm. With a potential of only 1 unit, he had only 1 circle, and the girls, on whose faces there was not a trace of admiration left, said that he turned out to be a simple dummy. The next day came. In the morning they left the hotel and went to the shopping street. Mirong Yan, still carrying Mountain Bay on her shoulder, waved her hand at Luzon Lai Lai and said that they needed to buy some supplies, and then they would return to Zongmen. Lai Lai, who was walking behind Luzon, gently pulled his sleeve and said that she would train very well. He looked down at her and replied with a smile that he really hoped so. She froze in place, and he moved on, and she thought that she still didn't know what the demon sect looked like from the inside. If he's going to be hunted or bullied, then she must train hard. Her gaze filled with determination, and Luzon, waving his hand at her, said that she should not lag behind. She immediately ran after him, and with a wide smile replied that she was already on her way. She thought that she would definitely come to his defense. There are countless clans on the Chanshan continent, of which the 4 main ones lead the right path. Wang Jianshan, Yichuan Shanyu, Qinshan Zong, Luo Tianzong. These 4 clans can act either alone or in pairs. The first 2 seem to disagree, but the relationship between these 2 is extremely warm. Wang Jianshan believes that 10,000 swords converge to 1. It is necessary to comprehend the art of swordsmanship using 10,000 swords. And Chuanshan says that 1 sword bypasses all laws. They need to use 1 sword all their lives. But in reality, both come from the same family. But because they held different views on cultivation, they became divided. As for Qinshan Zong and Luo Tianzong, these 2 just love to mess with each other. They have nothing in common. It is finally the turn of the demons, led by the 3 demonic sects, Mozong, Wu Jishan, and Chun Qilan. All 3 are very straightforward. Some time later, after buying supplies, a huge bag appeared behind Mirong Yan, and she said that since they bought everything, they could go to Zunmen. Luzon thought that the demon clan was now recruiting new recruits. Lai Lai looked at the huge bag behind her and asked how they could carry such a huge bag. In response, Mirong Yan showed her the jade ring on her finger and said that's it. After that, she activated the ring, causing it to glow, and the huge bag disappeared, moving into the ring. This sight greatly delighted Lai Lai, and she thought that now the backpack was not even visible. Some kind of ring for storage. It's not even a backpack that can be expanded for money. Luzon was not surprised by this storage ring and remained silent. After that, Mountain Bay got off Mirong Yan's shoulder, and she, using her strength, said that now it was time for them to go. She summoned her sword named Edgeworth. Streams of spiritual energy swirled around her, and Luzon thought, what kind of sword could withstand such a large body like hers? Lai Lai repeated the name of the sword with admiration and asked what it looked like. Mirong Yan put her hand on the hilt of the sword, which exuded powerful streams of energy, and Luzon and Lai Lai began to wait for it to leave the sheath. Mirong Yan pulled the sword out of its sheath, and then threw it into the air and proudly said that there was her sword. After that, she herself rose into the air with one quick jerk and jumped onto the sword. After that, she looked down at her companions and waved her hand, telling them to take off too. They raised their heads to look at her sword, but saw only a small blade under her feet and were disappointed. Then Mountain Bay took out a paper crane and, stretching her hand forward, told them not to lag behind. After she threw the crane paper onto the ground, a huge majestic bird appeared in front of them. Mountain turned to Lai Lai and her horse and said that they would fly with her. The girls jumped on the back of the crane and asked Lu Zun, "Is he coming?" Lu Zun quickly took the ladder, ran to the crane and climbed up, asking them to wait. After they sat on the crane, they flew into the sky, and Lai Lai, looking at Murong Yan flying in front, asked, "Will her sword break?" Mountain replied that practitioners cannot judge this matter with common sense. Flying swords are called feathers and contain good intentions. She handed her the scroll and said that let her take this. This is the introductory exercise of the demon clan. She can learn it. After these words, she looked at Lu Zun with a gloomy face and said that he couldn't. Before he became her horse, he had nothing to do with the clan. At her words, Lu Zun became upset and lowered his gaze, saying that he understood. He made an innocent and sad face and asked, even though he couldn't study it, could he at least touch it? A bright light began to emanate from it again, and Mountain, unable to resist its charm, handed him the scroll and told him that he could touch it. Lu Zun covered his sly smile with his hand and touched the scroll, thinking that although she is called Mountain, he knows that there are a kind of old Yingbei who are called differently. After touching the scroll, the system asked, "Does he want to study?" Note: once a practice method is confirmed, it cannot be changed. Lu Zun, who can refuse such skills. He confirmed the study and his body was illuminated with powerful energy. The system reported that he had studied the nutrition of Jaiju. 0 progress at the moment. After studying the technique, he smiled and thought that it was a pity that it was impossible to choose any exercises for a perfect start. He closed his eyes and said it was a wonderful feeling. Mountain turned to him and said that if he agreed to be her mount, then she would make his life easier. He replied that not now. Then she proudly crossed her arms over her chest and said with a smile that becoming her horse was a direct path to getting into the office in the most sacred place of the demon clan. Even disciples and elders are not allowed to enter there. After listening to their conversation, Lai Lai turned to Lu Zun and asked, "Is he really going to the demon clan to study?" Lu Zun did not answer and thought that of course the place where he was going was that same office. There were only 3 places on the continent that cannot be reached. The office in the demon clan is one of them. Getting inside Mozong's office is just the beginning. The real difficulty is that millions of players tried to become the master's apprentice, but only one was accepted, and that guy died due to a diseased liver. He was in complete shock when he heard the news, but he never thought he would find himself in a similar position. Murong Yan matched the flying crane and told Lu Zun that since he wanted to become a disciple of the demon clan, he must follow the rules and not act thoughtlessly. Let him remember, he must not become her mistress's disciple. Mountain asked indignantly, "What does this mean? She just doesn't remember some of the rules. Is that a problem?" Lai Lai thought that she was so righteous. After that, Murong Yan started talking about the rules, and Mountain was terribly angry. Lu Zun listened to her and thought that the Mozong demon clan really followed all the rules that the owner of the office issued. Having finished listening to the rules, Mountain said displeasedly that the rules were over. They needed to talk about more important things. The demon clan is divided into 3 territories: the outer gate, the inner gate, and the office. She pointed her finger at Lai Lai and said that she would be at the outer gate. After that, she pointed to Murong Yan and said that she was an inner gate disciple. Then she proudly pointed her finger at herself and said that she was a student of the Mr. Teacher himself. Even her horse belongs to the inner gate. Lu Zun gritted his teeth and looked away, thinking that it seemed that her intentions were obvious. He mentally cursed, and Lai Lai asked in confusion, "Mr. Teacher, will they also have to study in the clan?" Nananbe chuckled and said that it wasn't that he was a teacher, he just liked being called that. Ordinary external disciples have no right to listen to his teachings, only people like her. Lai Lai's eyes lit up with delight, and Lu Zun, looking away, thought that this monster could no longer be saved. By the way, no one really knows how strong this mister is. Someone once said, "If this mister is not the main boss, the live broadcast will turn upside down." After eating, he eats again, and so on in a circle. This seems to be his style, except those who cheat for food and drink. Huge mountains appeared among the clouds ahead, and below there was a forest. Murong Yan flew up to the crane and said that they had arrived. Lai Lai crawled to the very edge and, looking down, asked, "Where? Why doesn't she see anything?" Mountain took out a paper crane with a smile and said that of course she couldn't see anything. The crane flapped its paper wings and quickly flew ahead of them, straight towards the barrier in their path. As soon as the crane collided with the barrier, it crumbled into several pieces, and Manhwa said that if she had seen this, she would have already been dead. Lai was frightened when she saw the paper crane shatter into several pieces in an instant and fell silent. Yan turned to Manhwa with a smile and said that let her take out this thing, her token can only let her through. Manhwa crossed her arms and replied that she knew that. After that, she took out a cat's paw-shaped token from her pocket and told Luzun that she would simply say that the formation was laid down by her teacher. Luzun raised one eyebrow and remained silent, and after that, Manhwa extended his hand with the token forward to overcome the barrier. Streams of energy swirled around them, and a huge crane approached the barrier. Manhwa asked Luzun why he was so calm. Does he want to become her steed? Luzun, bored, replied that he would think about it. He frowned and thought that his strength was not enough. He spent everything on his appearance. All the women will lust after his body, so he needs to start training quickly. Otherwise, sooner or later, he will turn into their slave. He simply can't stand it. As soon as they overcame the demonic barrier, Lai's eyes widened in admiration. She saw in front of her several floating islands that had been hidden from prying eyes all this time. There were several more around the main island. Seeing such a beautiful view, Lai asked, "Is this really a demon clan?" Luzun looked around calmly and thought that this was his first time here. He couldn't believe it. Where is the sea of blood that he was told about? Manhwa looked at the floating islands with admiration and said that the rules do not matter, but they need to understand one thing. A journey through heaven and earth is worthy of your own heart. They flew past the first flying island on their way, and Manhwa, winking at Lai, said that this is what the teacher taught her. Lai said admiringly that this was very thoughtful. Luzun thought disappointedly, is this really a demon clan? He doesn't understand anything. Suddenly Lai called out to him and told him to look at that mountain. It's so strange. Luzun followed her gaze and turned his head to the side, seeing a mountain in the form of a long rectangle on the flying island. He thought it was really strange. Other mountains look like swords, but why does this one look like a scabbard? Yan seemed to read his thoughts and asked, it looks like a scabbard, right? This mountain has a very interesting origin. Lai became very interested in this and asked her to tell them. Luzun did not share her enthusiasm, but still decided to ask how unusual this was. Yan waved 2 fingers in front of them and said that the origin of this mountain is extremely great. That is, its origin is not small, but it is also great because it is not small. Suddenly Manhwa flew up to her and, hitting her on the top of her head with all her might, exclaimed, "What kind of nonsense is she talking about?" Luzun and Lai were surprised at first, and then he raised one eyebrow and thought that this was the last time he had heard such nonsense. After finishing beating Yan, Manhwa returned to the crane and said that she does not know the origin of this mountain, but this is the new Jing Peak. Let them not listen to her nonsense. Lai was upset and asked, could the elders really make up such things? In response, Yan only giggled, and by this time they had already reached the island. On the platform below, clan members stood and waved their hands, congratulating the young master on his return to the clan. The majestic crane landed on the platform. All the girls had already gone down, and Luzun threw the ladder off the bird and began to slowly descend. After that, Manhwa did not wait for him and returned the paper origami form to the crane, causing Luzun to fall down along with the stairs, and told the clan members that they should call Elder Kyushui and say that she brought new ones. They obeyed her order, and some time passed. Behind them, the hurried steps of a woman were suddenly heard, approaching them and calling the young master. Elder Kyushui smiled and asked, where are the new girls she was talking about? Suddenly she stopped when she saw Luzun and thought that he was so handsome. His hair fluttered in the wind, his handsome face was illuminated by the rays of the sun, and his amber eyes looked at her in confusion. She walked up to him and asked, is he the student brought by the young master? Luzun remained silent, still looking at her in confusion, and this angered Manhwa. She flew up, covering Luzun with herself, and asked what she wanted to do with her horse. Kyushui covered her mouth with her hand and asked in confusion, horse? Human? She smiled, narrowing her eyes slyly, and thought that the young master was not bad. Yan pushed Lai forward and told the elder that here was their newcomer. She has as many as 8 circles. Kyushui turned her attention to the confused Lai and exclaimed, 8 whole circles. She immediately approached her and, taking her hands, apologized to her. She introduced herself and said that she could contact her with any questions and worship her as well as a teacher. Lai Lai awkwardly greeted her, but suddenly Kyu Shui's face was illuminated by the bright radiance that Lu Xun exuded from himself. She turned her attention to him again and asked the young master how many circles he had. Mountain Bay silently raised her hand and showed her one finger with displeasure. Then the elder asked 10 laps. The students behind her were also surprised and exclaimed, "How is this possible?" All eyes immediately focused on Lu Xun, and the students said that this was amazing. This is a real talent immortal who came into the world. Mountain Bay smiled nervously and explained that he had 1 circle. After her words, Lu Xun awkwardly scratched the back of his head, and the elder thought that this was such a loss. The students immediately began to disperse, and one of them laughed awkwardly, saying that the weather was good today. The other guy said that this is true, by the way, his laundry was dry there. Another student said that then they would go, he would show him off. They all dispersed, and Lu Xun, approaching Mountain Bay, asked with a smile if he passed the tests, could he join the clan? She confirmed his words and asked, but why did he choose to be a student than her riding horse? In response, he smiled awkwardly and replied that he was just asking. Then he will ask another question. What if he wants to become Mr. Student? Everyone present looked at him with sidelong glances, and Mirong Yan asked, is he kidding? The elder said that he apparently had nothing but a handsome face. The disciples, who began to disperse, stopped and asked if he would not send him. An awkward and oppressive atmosphere hung over the entire site, and Lu Xun fell silent. Mountain Bay grinned and thought that he could become, perhaps, her favorite horse. She looked up at Lu Xun and said that Mr. accepts students for various reasons. He accepted her because she loves cats, and he wanted to have a cat demon among his students. And the reason this time is also simple. He wants to know, right? He confirmed her words and thought that he had carefully studied discipleship strategies back in his previous life. As long as the conditions remain the same, he will not fail. Mountain Bay raised her hand to her chin and said that if he wants to become a disciple, there are 3 conditions. First, he must be a mortal who has not undergone cultivation. Second, he should not be more than 30 years old. Lu Xun grinned and said that he seemed to fit both criteria. Mountain Bay told him to wait, there is a 3rd one. Third, he needs to jump off here and survive. The students standing nearby were greatly surprised by her words and exclaimed, does he need to survive? Even those who are cultivators will die if they jump from there. Without magical tools, even the elders will die. From the earth to the mountain of sword scabbards is 180,000 miles. Lu Xun grinned as he listened to their frightened voices, and the system announced a special task, infiltrating the office. He can accept the task or reject it. Lu Xun looked at the system window and thought that everything was as he had planned. His gaze filled with determination, and he thought that, of course, becoming Mr. Student is not so easy. After that, he passed by Mountain Bay and headed straight to the edge. They turned around in fear, and Lai asked in fear what he was doing. Let him not act so frivolously. Mountain Bay also began to worry and told him to listen to her. Being her mount is not that bad. Seniority is at least at the same level as Kyu Shui. Kyu Shui herself shrugged, looking at them blankly. Finally, Lu Xun turned to them and, putting 2 fingers to his temple, said goodbye to them. After that he rushed to the very edge, and the girls asked him not to do this. Let him stop now. They all ran after him, and Mountain Bay shouted excitedly that he should stop for her sake. But suddenly they all felt some kind of strong pressure. They froze in place, unable to move, and one of the students said that he could not move. Mountain Bay asked what happened. One of the students fell, losing his balance, and Lai Lai said that it was so hard for her. All this pressure disappeared in an instant when Lu Xun had already jumped off the mountain. He twirled in the air, performing pirouettes, and then dived down and said that he was flying. After that, his loud cry was heard, and the girls looked after him and shuddered, trying to recover from the unknown force that had just appeared. Lai Lai was very upset, tears rolled down her cheeks, and she asked why. Mirong Yan sighed sadly, and Mountain Bay, looking forward in shock, asked, would he rather die than become her riding horse? She frowned and wondered why, when he jumped off, some force stopped her. They all came together to the very edge, and she told the others to jump down. They agreed, and after that all the girls jumped down after Lu Xun, and Mountain Bay thought that she only wanted to see living people while she was living, corpses only after her death. She cannot allow his demise. And what was this power? While they were flying down for a long time, Kyu Shui exclaimed that all the lords of the peaks rushed here. After a while, they finally landed and Mountain smoothly lowering herself to the ground in front of Luzon, said that this brat had caused quite a commotion. Her face scrunched up as she looked at him. His whole body was beaten, and some of his entrails spilled all over the grass around him. When she saw this, she said that Mr. was not in the mountains, so his actions were in vain. Kyushui covered her mouth with her hand, looking at Luzon, and said that it was a pity that such a handsome man died in vain. Two tall men approached Mountain from behind and called out to her. She immediately turned around, looking up at them, and then lowered her eyes and displeasedly told Shen Yan that he was again behind the backs of his retinue. Shen Yan, who was as tall as Mountain squeezed between the two men and asked the young master, "Did this guy jump off the jingback?" His shiny bald head glinted in the sun. Due to practice with fire, there is no hair on his body at all. Mountain looked at him displeasedly and asked, was he also attracted by the unknown force that appeared during his fall? He nodded to her with a smile and confirmed her words. Then Mountain asked, does he see the source of this power? The smile disappeared from his face, and he replied that even with his capabilities, he sees nothing. She turned back to Luzon's body and thought, is he hiding some mysterious personality within himself? Did she get into trouble? Suddenly her eyes opened wider when she noticed some changes in him. She immediately ran up to Luzon, who was lying motionless on the ground, and, noticing the pulse on his neck, said that this guy was still alive. Luzon smiled with all his strength, looking at the 1 health unit on the system window and at the resurrection skill, which he could now use 2 times out of 3. Mountain immediately turned to Shen Yan and, pointing her finger at Luzon, exclaimed that this boy was not dead. Shen Yan asked why he did this when Mr. had already left. He's not here, and they can't make decisions for him. Then Mountain pointed to Luzon's soft-boiled body and said that Mr. could take it. They need to listen to the second eldest sister. She should have already known about everything. After her words, several magic circles appeared in front of them, from the center of which the elder sister's voice was heard. She said slowly that Mr. said he could. Everyone present heard these words, and Luzon smiled, pleased with his success. A system message appeared in front of his face, stating that the special task of infiltrating the office had been completed. Several days have passed. On the backside of Mozong's forbidden territory, there was a small hut among the mountains. This was the office that Luzon wanted to go to. Lai had already gotten used to the demonic sect and changed into their black uniform. She walked up the mountain with a basket on her back and thought, Luzon is feeling much better today, isn't it? She smiled at the thought of him and wished to see him as soon as possible. On the way she met a bamboo grove where a girl was sitting on a stone near a small pond. Lai turned her gaze to her and thought that she was here again. She stopped to greet her with a bow, but the girl ignored her. Lai ran further towards the hut with a smile, thinking that this was Mr.'s second disciple, the young master's second elder sister. Very strange. She always meditates when she goes and when she comes. She was told that she did not like to be disturbed. She even wondered when she would stop meditating. After a few more steps, she finally went up to the hut, where Mountain was lying on a table in the courtyard, fast asleep, basking in the sun. Lai bowed to her in greeting and said that she had met her master. Mountain opened one eye when she heard her voice, and then stretched out and meowed, telling her to go. Lai nodded at her and headed inside the office, saying that she understood. She opened the door inside and thought that the young master hates being called little. She immediately becomes grumpy and angry. She took the basket from her back and, going up to the bed where the wounded Luzon lay, said that she was here. After that, she wiped his face with a handkerchief and said that Master Shen's elixir was truly magical. He would recover quickly. But when will he wake up? She sat on the edge of the bed and said, slightly upset, that once he got better, she wouldn't be able to go back to the mountain. She won't be able to see him for a year or so. Tears appeared in her eyes, and she thought that in the whole world, the only one she knew was him. She took out a bottle of pills and said that, however, now he has become a real legend. A lot of students are chatting about him. He took advantage of this opportunity and jumped off the cliff without even raising an eyebrow. This is so courageous. She put a pill in his mouth and said that she wanted to see him healthy and alive rather than not be able to do this at all. At the same time, Shen Yan arrived on the mountain. He passed by Mountain and his shadow fell on her face, from which she woke up. She stretched and yawned, causing tears to appear in her eyes. Then she looked up at him and asked how he got here. He bowed to her and said that he wanted to see how their youngster recovered from his injury. She lazily lay down on her side, resting her head on her hand, and asked, should she leave? Shen Yan bowed to her again and said that he would stay here and she could rest. Hearing this, Mountain Bay's ears went up, and immediately after that she ran down the mountain and said that then she would leave everything to him. From her fast running, the wind rose, from which Shen Yan's clothes began to flutter and Mountain Bay's farewell words were heard somewhere in the distance. After she left, he collected his thoughts, looking down the stairs, and then turned to the office and said that now no one would bother him. Meanwhile, Lai Lai was fascinated by Lu Zun's sleeping appearance. She gazed at his shiny lips and blushed slightly, thinking that he had such beautiful lips. She wonders what they taste like. Suddenly, at the same moment, there was a knock on the door, and she immediately jumped up from her seat, shuddering with fright. Then she turned sharply, and with a flushed face exclaimed, "Who is it there?" The door opened, Shen Yan froze in the passage, his bald head sparkling, and answered that it was him. Lai Lai calmed down a little and asked why he was here. He went inside and, looking at Lu Zun, replied that he had come to see the wounded man. Although his face remained calm, in his heart he was very angry, and thought that for the sake of this little thing, he sacrificed a rare panacea that he had treasured for many years. The legendary tablet of flesh and white bones. He was very upset and thought that he could not cope with the loss of it. He then grinned with the thought that now that he had gotten to it, he had to give something back. With that sinister smile and sparkling eyes, he slowly reached out to Lu Zun with his hands and Lai Lai, giving him a place by the bed, covered her mouth in fear and thought, what is this creepy guy trying to do to him? Maybe it's because of the elixir. Does he want to attack him? While she was thinking about this, Shen Yan put his hand on Lu Zun's shoulder and called out to Lai Lai. From surprise and fright, she froze in place and, without turning around, asked in a trembling voice, he won't do anything strange, will he? He approached her with a beaming smile and said that she was very talented. Absolutely all roads in the future were open to her. She was very surprised by his words and decided to ask what he said. He took out a tiny red stone from his pocket, then handed it to Lai Lai and said let her take it. Her body type is perfect for practicing with fire, so this will be beneficial for her. She took the fire pebble and, looking at it, thought why did he suddenly give it to her? After that, Shen Yan walked past her, heading towards the exit, and said with a smile that he was leaving. As he walked towards the door, he began to get nervous, gritting his teeth and thinking, why doesn't she ask questions? Does she have anything to say? Let her at least ask something. After a few seconds of silence, Lai Lai looked at him and asked why he gave it to her. Shen Yan smiled, finally waiting for her question, and then returned his calm face and replied that it was because this place valued talent. With a confident gait, he walked out of the hut and said goodbye to her with a grin. Lai Lai looked after him and thought that, in general, he was not that scary. As soon as Shen Yan flew into the air, heading to his peak, he laughed and said that now she would definitely choose him as her teacher. In fact, Shen Yan was the most greedy master who has almost no resources for his students. No wonder no one chose him. While he was flying, he thought that after all, talented students had not come to them for a long time. Not understanding why he still had no students, he said that this time he would not miss his chance. 15 minutes ago, when Shen Yan arrived at the mountain, Mountain Bay rushed down and joyfully shouted that she was finally allowed to rest. She called to the second elder sister and said that she was coming. While on the run, she transformed into a cat and finally ran to a bamboo grove. Noticing her older sister sitting on a stone near the pond, she quickly approached her, causing many muffled footsteps from cat paws to be heard around the area. As soon as she approached, she jumped high, spreading her paws to the sides and releasing her bones. Suddenly, in flight, the second older sister grabbed her by the scruff of the neck, which made her shudder, and put her on her feet, starting to quietly stroke her head. The second eldest sister's name is Gu Ziaman. With a slight smile, she began to stroke Mountain Bay's head and chin, which made her purr contentedly. Having relaxed, she looked up at her sister and said that she had so many interesting stories from the mountain. The most interesting thing was that that boy was originally her horse. Hearing this, the second eldest sister got angry and stopped petting her. Then she hit Mountain Bay's head with her fingers and her cat's face contorted. She meowed displeasedly and said that she just wanted to see his beautiful body, nothing more. Gu Zioman looked down at her and hit her on the head again. Then Mountain Bay meowed, shouting that she was no longer talking to her. After the beating, she got off her sister's lap and grabbed the bump on her head with her paws, which appeared from her blows. Angry, she released her claws and told Gu Ziomen that she didn't care. But Gu Ziomen ignored her. She silently looked at the pond and Mountain fell silent. After that, she buried her head in her elbow and said that she should not be angry with her. There are so many interesting things outside of this mountain. Let her talk about everything. Night fell. Mountain had long since returned and lay down on a bench near the office, looking at the moon. Lai was still inside, monitoring Lu Zun's condition. She peered into his face and thought that, of course, he had always been handsome. Suddenly his eyebrows trembled. He frowned and opened his mouth slightly, asking for water. Seeing that he woke up, Lai immediately hurried to give him something to drink and said that she would bring everything now. At the same moment, Mountain flew into the office and stuck the spout of the teapot into his mouth, pouring water inside, and said that he should drink as much as he wanted. Lai was frightened by her sudden appearance, and Lu Zun began to ask her to stop. Looking at Mountain Lai thought that she was just pretending to be asleep. After that, Lu Zun, whose whole body was covered in bandages, sat up on the bed and asked how long had he slept. He thought that he would be resurrected on the spot, but did not expect that he would be left with just a drop of life. This is some kind of curse. Lai asked, did she recover so quickly? Mountain patted Lu Zun on the shoulder and said with a wide smile that it was a pity that his physique was not suitable to be her mount. Lai smiled and said that he only slept for 3 or 4 days after such an injury. He asked how he came to his senses so quickly. He thought that he had a feeling that something had happened to the blood. Lai smiled widely and said that this is all the Sovereign Lord. He is so kind. Lu Zun immediately jumped out of bed and said, which means he needs to thank him for his help. After that, he began to jump and run around the entire office, making wide movements with his arms and legs, and Lai, looking at him in horror, shouted that he should not move so often. What if he breaks something? Meanwhile, Mountain sat on the bed, crossing her legs, and while he was running back and forth, she said that there was one problem. He froze in place, and both girls loomed over him with gloomy faces, and Mountain with an ominous smile asked how he, a mortal without cultivation, could survive and not die. Lu Zun was scared at first, but then quickly pulled himself together and answered with a beaming smile that it was a secret. The girls blushed a little at this look, and Lai said that his face made him believe him. Mountain agreed with her, and then sharply shook her head from side to side, and said that he should not try to fool her. He replied that it was all because of the family heirloom. After that, he thought, is the resurrection system a family heirloom? Lai was delighted and said that this was simply amazing. He seems to have a rich family. Mountain just chuckled and said suspiciously, which was not very truthful. Lu Zun sighed, thinking that there was such a confusion here. But in the demon clan, there is indeed a treasure hidden without an owner. He imagined a huge shining treasure, and his face broke into a smile. As soon as he raises his level, he will achieve his goal. Mountain noticed that he was dreaming about something and waved her hand in front of his face and told him to wake up. What is he thinking about? Did he forget? Lu Zun immediately returned from his thoughts and asked blankly what she was talking about. She flew up, towering over him and, proudly raising her head, said that he still had not called her big sister. Lai giggled quietly when she heard this, but Lu Zun noticed this and pointed his finger at her displeasedly, asking, why is she laughing? Did she forget anything? She looked at him incomprehensibly and asked, what is it? He turned away from her, raising his chin, and said that she should call him Uncle Master. At his words, Lai froze in place and opened her mouth, not knowing what to say, but then she bowed to him and awkwardly called him Uncle Master. Satisfied with this, he let out a chuckle and then quickly bowed to Mountain with a smile and said that he was greeting his sister. She became very angry, pointing her finger at him, and exclaimed that he believed in himself too much. She bites him. Lu Zun immediately approached her face, shining with his charm, and asked, really? This made Mountain involuntarily pull back and become slightly embarrassed. After that, she left the office, clasped her hands behind her back, and said that he should get dressed and follow her. The second elder sister wants to see him. Lu Zun looked after her with a confident smile and thought that being beautiful meant being able to do whatever he wanted. Time passed. Gu Ziomen continued to meditate on the stone in the light of the moon, and fireflies flew around her. Mountain appeared in the bamboo grove with Lu Zun, and she, waving her hand to the second eldest sister, shouted that she had brought him. Lu Zun folded his hands to bow and said with a slight smile that he greeted his elder sister. She didn't answer, and he looked at the back of her head and thought that he had heard about her before. Guzayomen's second eldest sister, no one has ever seen her. There was silence in the grove, and he looked away, thinking that he didn't know what to say. He feels so helpless. She stutters, but he has no idea how people know that. Suddenly, Guzayomen lightly waved her hand, sending the book flying straight towards Luzon. He noticed this, and then suddenly leaned to the side and deftly grabbed it. Catching the book, he briefly froze in a cool pose, but his legs began to tremble. After that, he opened the book and thought, why is it thicker than it should be? After reading the contents, he was surprised and thought that it seemed like a real treasure for beginners. Immediately after this thought, he slightly raised one eyebrow and, looking at the book with disappointment, thought that it was useless for him. He clutched the book to his chest and thanked the second eldest sister for the greeting. Immediately after that, he looked at Manhwa with a smile and thought, why didn't the young master give him anything? Manhwa noticed his gaze on her, and she shuddered. She thought, why is he looking at her like that? While Luzon silently glared at her, she began to get nervous. His sparkling eyes literally reflected the question, why did second elder sister give him something and she didn't? She slightly covered her face with her hand to somehow hide from his gaze and thought, why is there so much in his eyes? This drives her crazy. She couldn't stand it, and handing Luzon a jade ring, said that this was for him, this was his welcome gift. He immediately snatched the ring from her hands, and, having examined it more closely, thanked her with a smile. The system reported that a storage ring had been received. Does he want to wear this? If he puts on this ring, his inventory will expand by 30 units. While he was looking at the ring, Manhwa looked at his back and said that he couldn't help but like this gift. She chose it especially for him. After her words, Luzon turned around slightly and said that this gift was worth several 1,000 zlotys. How can he not like it? Manhwa's ears perked up slightly, her face turned red, and she asked, does he like it? Lai, who had just recently approached them, also blushed when she saw Luzon. At this moment, Guzayomen raised her hand slightly, signaling them to leave. Manhwa understood the gesture and turned around, telling the others that it was time for them to return. Luzon walked back with the others and looked slightly towards Guzayomen, thinking that it seems that second senior sister is a woman of few words, even he doesn't know much about her. Time passed, they continued to climb to the hut between the mountains, and in the darkness of the night fireflies appeared on the stairs. Lai slowly extended her hands towards the glowing bug, and then deftly caught it and smiled widely. Luzon followed her and suddenly asked why she was so happy. She looked at him, and then with a smile she released the firefly, watching it slowly take off, and answered that because he had woken up. Luzon was surprised at first, and then smiled slightly and thought that she was really happy because of him. He waved his hand and told her to come here. Hearing this, she turned around and looked at him questioningly. Then she went down to him, stopping on a step higher and equaling his height. Her face turned a little red, and she asked with a big smile, what does he want to do? After this question, he immediately hit her on the forehead with his finger, which she clearly did not expect, and then quickly ran up the steps, smiling playfully. Lai covered her forehead with her hands and exclaimed indignantly, is this how he is being played? He joyfully continued to climb up and laughingly replied that Uncle Master could play as much as he wanted. Manhwa, who was walking ahead of everyone, pricked up her ears, and a few seconds later Luzon ran up to her. All his playfulness disappeared when he caught up with her and faced her frown. Immediately after that she hit him with her finger, pushing him straight into the rock. From the impact with the stone, there was a strong roar and his painful cry. Several pieces of stones flew to the sides, and Lai looked in shock at Luzon, who was nailed to the wall. Then Manhwa asked, big sister can also play with him, right? She continued to climb towards the office, and Luzon, crawling out of the dent in the rock that was made by his body, grabbed his head and sighed painfully. After that, a huge lump grew on his forehead and tears appeared in his eyes. Seeing all this, Lai laughed and covered her mouth with her hands. After a while, they finally reached the top and entered the yard. Luzon continued to play, and Lai froze in place and was afraid to take a step. She thought that she could only enter the office when Luzon was unconscious, but now he is healthy. Why did she come back? She looked at them walking towards the entrance to the office and thought, will they kick her out? Luzon asked Manhwa if he could lend Lai the gifted book for teaching. She waved her hand at him and told him that he could do whatever he wanted. Hearing these words, Lai Lai blushed and thought, could she really stay with Lu Zun? At that moment, he walked up to her and put his hand on her shoulder, calling out to her with a smile. She shuddered slightly, and then he leaned towards her ear and said that she should come with him. Because of these words, spoken directly into her ear, she blushed even more. They walked into the office together, and she, hesitantly hovering at the door, asked what was the matter. He handed her the gifted book and said that she should take it. It is full of useful materials for her. She put her hands in front of her as a sign of refusal and asked if this was not only for him. This is such an important thing. He smiled and replied that it was gratitude for her concern. And besides, he already read it. She looked up at him in surprise and asked, already? And when? He answered with a confident look that the moment he picked it up. She took the book and asked uncertainly, is this true? Somehow she doesn't believe it. Then he said that she could open any page and make sure that he remembered it. She opened the book and replied that she understood. Suddenly, Lu Zun extended his hand forward and asked her to wait. She looked up and asked what was the matter. He replied that he wanted to make it more difficult. Let her ask him not the original text, but the commentary of the second elder sister. She smiled and said that was great. Opening a random page, she said that she should say the third comment on the second page. He walked confidently around the room and said that there was no need to rush, let them do it step by step. After that, Lai Lai turned the page and said that he should name the 7th on the 15th page. He stood in a cool pose and said that they need to carefully monitor their breathing. They must not forget about it. Lai Lai, already greatly amazed by his correct answers, flipped the page again and said that he should name the first comment on page 37. He closed his eyes and, lightly waving his index finger, said that they should not be greedy when absorbing spiritual energy. After that, she slammed the book and exclaimed in surprise, did he really remember everything? Lu Zun proudly raised his head and asked, what was she thinking? He thought that as soon as he touched the book, the system automatically saved all the text. What a wonderful skill this is. Meanwhile, Lai Lai looked at him with loving and admiring eyes, and her sympathy began to grow. She thought that he was so attentive to her, and that he was also so handsome. After that, Lu Zun sat down on the floor and, pointing his hand at the bed, said that let her sleep on the bed, he would be fine here too. After that, she sat down on the bed and said with an embarrassed look that, in fact, 2 people could sleep on this bed. He replied that he knew that, but he wanted to practice. Meanwhile, Manhwa was in the other room and listened to their conversation with her ears pricked up. She pressed herself against the door and thought, don't they say that people need to be warm all the time? Or does this guy have a herring instead of brains? Meanwhile, Lai Lai was lying on the bed, opening a book in front of her, and turned her gaze to Lu Zun, thinking that he was so strong and hardworking. She looked down at the book again and, filled with determination, thought that she could not give up. After a while, she still fell asleep, drooling from her mouth, and Lu Zun continued to sit on the floor and train. He closed his eyes and thought that although he could not use the system, he had long wanted to try real cultivation. Images of half-naked cultivators popped into his head, and he thought that cultivation in novels was quite interesting. Even double cultivation had been created, and their goal is to get double the pleasure. Spiritual energy began to accumulate in his lower abdomen, and he thought that he needed to begin. Streams of energy began to emanate from him, raising his hair upward, and he thought that he needed to experience the feeling of improvement. Suddenly, he was struck by a sharp pain, and with tears in his eyes, he thought, why does it hurt so much? Who even said that improvement is cool? What's happening? He shuddered and thought that it felt as if thousands of needles were piercing his body. He can't do anything. Meanwhile, Manhwa continued to listen to what was happening in the other room and realized that he was training. Cultivation is quite difficult. He cannot do it alone. At the same time, Gu Xiaoman, who was sitting in the bamboo grove, felt bursts of energy and looked up from her meditation. Lu Zun gritted his teeth in pain, blood flowed from his eyes, nose and mouth, and he thought that practice is very important. But actually, why the hell is it so hard? He continued to practice despite the pain and thought that he was unhappy, and that was why practice was so difficult for him, right? Powerful streams of energy swirled around him, and he tensed even more, not believing that he was doing this. The veins on his face bulged, and all the pain was reflected in his gaze, but he continued and thought that it was mortally painful. The night of suffering finally ended. The sun rose over the mountains, illuminating the office inside. Lai Lai woke up and stood up slightly from the bed, yawning and rubbing her eyes. She looked at Lu Zun, who was sitting next to him with bruises under his eyes from a difficult night and bleeding. Her eyes filled with admiration, and she wondered if he had been training all night. It's so painful. Her sympathy increased again, and Lu Xun, looking at her tiredly, thought, is her sympathy increasing even when she sees blood gushing from all the orifices? Meanwhile, Manhwa, who also stayed up all night watching Lu Xun, had bruises under her eyes and wondered how he was still standing. At the same time, a fresh morning breeze blew through the bamboo grove. Gu Xiaoman closed her eyes, sensing particles of spiritual energy around her, and thought with a smile that this boy was amazing. Some time later, Lai Lai helps Liu Sun up and asks if he is okay. He says she will understand when she starts practicing. This is very painful, and nothing compares to this. It feels like there are 100 doctors around him who want to stick needles into him. Lai Lai says that she is not afraid of it. Liu Sun looks at her and asks why she is not scared by this. She leaves the house with him and says that it is because there is nothing more painful than losing your parents. Liu Sun felt a little sad about what she said and looked outside. He apologizes to her, but Lai Lai looks at him and says it doesn't matter. She will train hard. She turned to him and said that she wouldn't be able to come here anymore because of practice. She bowed before him and said that with this, she bids him farewell. She looked away from him and thinks that they are breaking up, and how long they are. She didn't have time to finish her thought because Liu Sun pulled her cheek and asked if she was going to die there. He let her go and, calling her a stupid girl, said that she would not be able to climb the mountain, but he could always see her. In this world, she is his only friend. Lai Lai blushed because she looked at him and called him very handsome. She looks at him with a flushed face and radiates sympathy. Liu Sun is embarrassed by this and wonders why she allocates so much. Some time later, Lai Lai leaves, waving his hand, saying that he must take care of himself. Liu Sun stands behind her and waves at her. He smiles a little and thinks that he will take care of himself. After all, everything is just beginning. By the way, I wonder if luck will smile on him and whether he will be able to meet his sister who played Tianchen. It is quite possible. He needs to level up. Even if there is no opportunity to return, he cannot allow himself to be bullied. A system window appears in front of him, in which it is written that he has level 0, experience 686 out of 100, an update is available. Does he want to update? Liu Sun wonders. Yesterday's experience before training gave him 666 points, but after training only 20 points. He's happy with everything. He agrees and increases his level by 1 and thinks that at the moment he simply has no choice. He is so hungry, and before he gets up, we need to find food. He turns around when he hears someone congratulating him on starting practice. Turning around, he notices Shen Yan, who says that this is a real blessing for the demon clan. Their students are so smart and talented. Liu Sun bowed and greeted him, wondering why he was here. Does he really want to charge for treatment? This bald guy is known as the Iron Rooster. There is not a single hair on his body. Some time later, Manhwa runs at high speed. In her hands there is some kind of fish and bird, and in her teeth there is another fish. Liu Sun was very surprised when he noticed her and says that it was very fast. She threw it all on the ground and asks, what else did he expect from his sister? She dusts off her hands and thinks that she is very kind. Liu Sun says she's amazing. He is glad about what happened and thinks that she is a wonderful hunter. Manhwa enters the room and says that this is the kitchen of the third elder brother. He always treats her. She points her finger at Liu Sun and says that if he makes it tasteless, he will eat it himself and may not even call her. He agreed to this. After that, he took a large knife and began to peel the scales off one of the fish. With the same knife, he quickly cuts vegetables on the board. He cooks a dish with fish in a large frying pan and pours something over it from a large spoon. Manhwa smelled a smell coming from the kitchen, and it greatly surprised her. Saliva began to flow from her mouth, and her pupils became very large, and she said that it smelled so delicious. She quickly ran to the kitchen and said that it smelled too delicious. She bursts into the kitchen, and Liu Sun, surprised by this, asks the fourth elder sister, "What's the matter?" Manhwa runs to him and says that she cannot wait any longer, she wants to eat. Liu Sun stopped her, saying that actually it would be worth sharing with the second elder sister. Hearing this, Manhwa fell to the ground out of surprise. She took the basket of food and says he is right. It needs to be shared with the second older sister. Some time later, Gu Xiaoman sits in the forest and meditates while the smell of a dish approaches her. She turns around and says that she smelled something fragrant. Manhwa runs towards her with a basket in her hands and loudly calls for her second older sister. She puts the basket next to her and says that she should try her brother's creation. She removed the lid and asks, how would they divide 2 fish and a chicken? She divides the dish very quickly, placing it on plates. Manhwa hands the second eldest sister a tray of fish and a leg of chicken and says that it is for her. Liu-sun goes to them and wonders, does a person like second elder sister even need to eat? He is surprised to see her and wonders, is she really eating? Manhwa took out the remaining fish and said that she was very hungry. She opened her mouth to eat this fish and Liu-sun tries to stop her and says that she should share it with him. He tries to take the fish from her and says that she should give it to him. Gu Zioman sits next to them and calmly eats what they gave her. After some time, when they had all eaten, Manhwa says she can't eat anymore. Liu-sun agrees, looking at her belly and says that there is nothing left for him at all. They were both surprised when they noticed the strange sounds Gu Zioman was making. She immediately stopped making those sounds and they both think it's great. After that they leave and Liu-sun asks the young master when will the Lord return. Manhwa calmly asks how she can know this. He looks at her and asks why he came down from the mountain in the first place. Is there anything important? A battle or something like that? Manhwa looked at him with a contemptuous look and asked why do something so boring. Going down the mountain is fun in itself. Liu-sun felt like an idiot and asked if this was fun. Manhwa spread her hands and asked, isn't that so? If it weren't for him, she herself would have already run away from this mountain. Liu-sun looks at her with a blank look and wonders what is wrong here. Don't the members of the demon sect think that it is their duty to harm the world and bully everyone? Going down the mountain is really just for fun. A system window appears in front of him, in which it is written that he can open the gaming forum. Liu-sun looks at the form of the game and thinks that there is nothing special here. He notices something and thinks it's very fast. Only 1 minute passed. The form is open, but there is still a lot of time before the beta test. There is no point in joining now, right? I wonder if the transience of time is different in the worlds. He hopes that tomorrow's ceremony will be successful. Players will be simply enchanted. Sometime later, Liu-sun is practicing and blood flows from his mouth, and he is in severe pain. He radiates energy around him and says that with this food, Jaiju can save 20 years of his life. In the system window, it is written that he has 606 experience points out of 500 points. Liu-sun notices this system window and says that the good thing is that he has experience points in his account. Manhwa runs into his room and tells him that he must wake up as quickly as possible. She quickly goes to him and says that they should go quickly. She grabbed Liu-sun's hand and begins to pull. He follows her and asks what is going on. Manhwa says that today is his entrance ceremony, so many people have come. Liu-sun looks at her and asks, will she say at least some nice words? Manhwa says it doesn't matter, they have to go. He says she can go, but he needs to change first. She turns to him and says that he is right, he is now the Lord's disciple, so he should change into Mozong's clothes. Her cheeks are red, and she says that he can change right here. She promises that she won't peek. She was surprised when Liu-sun grabbed her from behind and lifted her up. He throws her outside and says that she should go and wait here. Having done this, he is about to close the door and looks at her. Manhwa got so angry that she started emitting strong flames and asks if he really thinks she cares about his body. Liu-sun didn't answer her and simply closed the door in front of her, leaving her angry on the other side. Manhwa calmed down a little and crossed her arms in front of her, thinking that although she didn't see her brother changing clothes, she was interested. What would he look like in Demon Clan clothes? He's so handsome. After Liu-sun changed into different clothes, he opened the door and went outside. He walked out of his house wearing black clothes Mozong with a slight smile. Manhwa blushed when she saw him in different clothes and called his name, trying to say something. Liu-sun radiates light around himself and asks his sister, is something wrong? She could not stand his beauty and ran away, screaming loudly and covering her reddened face with her hands. She thinks she can't lose control. She still wants him to be her steed. Although it's impossible, he's her junior. It doesn't matter, she still wants it. Liu-sun looks at her from afar, not understanding how good he is, and asks what is happening to her. Is this feline epilepsy? He looks at his clothes and asks, however, does it seem to him, or is the demon clan's uniform a weapon? The system should check this. The system notifies that this is a precious garment without any yellow level attributes. Liu-sun wonders, these clothes have no attributes. Usually players always have several sets of such things. And then an ordinary chicken turns into a fashionable one. He notices Manhwa with a shabby face and asks the fourth sister what's wrong. She laughed and said that everything was fine. She had a fight with stray cats on the road and won. Liu-sun has little faith that she is telling the truth and asks, did she just get into a fight? In fact, Manhwa did this in order to distract herself and calm down. She says that they should go because the ceremony will begin very soon. It will be indecent if they are late. Liu-sun follows her and asks fourth senior sister, did she go on stage to give a speech at her grand ceremony? Manhwa says that of course it is. Liu-sun looks at her and asks what did she say then? She held her hand next to her throat and says that she said don't provoke her or she will cut off their heads. Liu-sun was embarrassed when he heard this and thinks that he can imagine what the demon sect disciples looked like back then. Manhwa begins to pull out something and says that however, for grand ceremonies like his, they need to demonstrate the style of a small ceremony. Liu-sun is embarrassed when he hears this and says that she should not get anything strange. They take off on a crane, which Manhwa called, and she says that this is a horse, everyone should have it. Down there are the disciples of their sect. The students notice them and ask, is this the same uncle owner? Is this even human in appearance? He's like a living fairy. He is so handsome that their legs give way. It's incredible. With an appearance like his, he would have no problem finding a wife. As soon as she saw him, her whole life immediately flashed before her eyes. Liu-sun suspects nothing and wonders what is happening and why is it so noisy here. The system notifies that his reputation is growing. Note, he must be careful with excessive attention from women because it can put him in danger. Liu-sun was surprised to notice this and wondered, what kind of note is this? Manhwa says he needs to prove himself to the students. Unexpectedly, she kicks him and says that he should go ahead. Liu-sun falls from a great height and screams loudly in fear, while she says that he must come down on his own. She smiles looking at him and thinks that he should let her check his recent cultivation progress. If he cannot stand firmly on his feet, then he will be humiliated even more than she. The students notice him and say that they should watch. The uncle owner falls. He heard that he was practicing. How could he reach a new level in such a short time? Uncle the owner should not fall face down. Liu-sun continues to fall, and looking back, he wonders what kind of shameless cat is this. He smiled and wondered, did she want to make him look like an idiot? However, it won't be that easy. He grouped himself in the air and thinks that she didn't take something into account. He is the best professional player. He landed next to the other students who were standing in the square. The students were shocked after he landed next to them, and they saw something that greatly surprised them. Liu-sun stands on his feet and thinks that for him, controlling the body is very easy. The students were shocked and delighted when they saw him in this pose and simply admired him. The system notifies that his reputation is growing. Note, he must beware of male attention because it can bring him danger. Liu-sun was surprised and did not understand the essence of this note. Shen Yan, who is standing in the square along with everyone else, begins to cough to attract attention. The students turn their attention from Liu-sun and turn to him. They all bowed before him and greeted the master. Liu-sun looks around and wonders where she is. He notices Lai Lai in the crowd of students waving at him and thinks that there she is. He smiled slightly when he noticed something. The students were very happy and embarrassed when they noticed his smile. Lai Lai blushed, as did all the other students standing next to her, and was glad that he noticed her. The man, along with Shen Yan, approached him and greeted the master. Liu-sun smiled and thought that the students greeted him. Now every peak leader and sect leader was cheering for him. His status is now very high. Manhwa laughs and mocks him, making gestures. Liu-sun was unhappy when he noticed this and thinks that she is lucky that he cannot do anything to her. Shen Yan folds his hands in front of him and asks him to begin. Liu-sun smiles and thinks that of course he will start, but he is going to do something else. He waved his hand to the side, and in front of him was a system window in which it was written, does he want to increase his level? He is going to agree to it and thinks that he should start. When he agreed, strong energy and glow began to emanate from his body. People notice it and ask what is it? Has the master really already risen to the second level? It's incredibly difficult to get to the second level. Shen Yan and Manhwa, who look at this, think that it is even more difficult than going to the 10th level, since it requires enlightenment. People say that at the first level you need to absorb Kai into your body, and at the second level you need to start creating your own energy. To achieve this, you must not only be extremely talented, but also have a calm mind. The master didn't even show himself in front of everyone. They should look at him. He's really going to give them advice. All the students rejoice and say loudly that the path to improvement is very long. You need to develop your mind. All the disciples bowed to him at the same time, lining up in many rows and thanking him. Liu Sun was surprised when he saw this and wondered who and what did he teach. The system notifies that his reputation is increasing very quickly. He was very surprised when he noticed this and asked what was happening. Shen Yan thinks that in just 2 days, Master Uncle brought the Kai eating technique to the 2nd level. How big a sea of Kai did he see? Some people are small-minded and can only see a sea of Kai the size of a tank. Some people are farsighted and can see a small stream. Talented people will see something different. The sea of Kai he saw was like a river. He looks at it and wonders, so what did he see? Liu Sun is thinking at this moment, by the way, according to the Kai eating technique, he can see the Kai sea after he reaches the 2nd level. But why hasn't he seen anything yet? Is he really chosen in order not to see anything? He thinks this is right. This is exactly how it should be. The students look at him and ask, I wonder what sea of Kai the great Uncle Master saw. Considering the state of mind of the great Uncle Master, it seems to him that he saw a big river. The student says that, however, the Uncle Master didn't tell them anything. He wants to know what it looks like under his clothes. The students turned to her and asked what she meant. Is she saying this seriously? Shen Yan asks what kind of sea of Kai he thinks Uncle Master saw. The man says that since Uncle Master didn't tell them, it seems to him that he saw a small sea of Kai. This man Gongshu Panyu, the leader of Thunder Peak and the elder of law enforcement, is a righteous man. The woman says she doesn't think so. Uncle is a master, he is a disciple of a teacher, and he has a transcendental nature. She thinks he saw a lake or even a river. This is Luo Wangqiu, the leader of Watercloud Peak, a liberal woman. Sima King, the leader of the Evergreen Peak, the old man says that based on his intuition, he agrees with Gongshun Panyu. Yu Hangshan, the leader of Jumping Peak, a slippery person, asks if they should make a bet. He became embarrassed when he noticed the others' gazes on him and said that he was just making a suggestion. They can forget about it if they don't like it. Everyone except Gongshu Panyu says it's a good idea. They must make a bet. She will definitely win. He tells his friends that according to the 13th clause of the Sex Charter, such behavior is not encouraged, and violators must pay 500 spiritual stones. Everyone immediately handed him 500 spiritual stones and said that he can take it, and he shouldn't be so cruel. He shouldn't spoil their mood. It is not forbidden, so they will pay 500 spirit stones. It's just a small bet. Gongshu Panyu remained standing in place with 20 spiritual stones while they walked away from him to the side discussing something. He placed these 4 bags of spirit stones on the ground. He goes to them, throwing his bag of spiritual stones, and says that it is just a small bet. It's okay to do something like this from time to time. He runs to the others and says that they can count on him. Liu Sun notices them and thinks they look very strange. He feels that they are looking at him, and he does not like this feeling. Mountain Bay lands on a crane next to him and says that he should climb up and they can come back. Liu Sun notices her strange expression and wonders why she is also looking at him like that. He climbed onto the crane and called his 4th older sister. He looks at her and says that she has been looking at him all the way. Is there something wrong? Mountain Bay continues to look at him with a strange smile. She says she wants to get straight to the point. What kind of sea of Kai did he see? Liu Sun was embarrassed when he heard this question. He remembers what happened and thinks that in fact, at the moment when he increased his level, he saw only endless darkness. He didn't see any sea of Kai. He turns to her and says that he cannot tell her. Mountain Bay was unhappy with this answer and asks what's the matter. She's his older sister. Liu Sun thinks that even if he is shameless and likes to pretend to be the chosen one, he must save his face. He looks at her with a pitiful gaze and thinks that if he tells others that he has not seen the Sea of Kai, and he only has 1 circle of talent, then he will not be able to hold his head for the rest of his life. Mountain Bay turns away from him and says that since he doesn't want to talk about it, then he can forget it. She thinks that apparently he is not talented. She says that, however, he must cook her fish tonight as compensation. Liu Sun says there is no problem. Mountain Bay looks at him and thinks it's okay if he saw a small Sea of Kai. Since he is her fellow, she will kill anyone who tries to intimidate him. Liu Sun thinks that he has begun to vaguely feel that he is similar to himself from the real world. He is a sad and unhappy man with no parents, no past, and no friends. At the time, he only showed off his skills so that others would pay attention to him. For players like him who don't have a guild or studio, he won't attract others' attention or get orders unless he is boastful. No one likes to show off too much of themselves. Liu Sun lay down on the crane and thinks that he only did it to attract attention. After all, he has to earn money to support his sister. However, maybe there is a possibility that his Sea of Kai is actually black. The next day, Liu Sun sits at the table and eats while Manhwa lies on the feet of the second elder sister and says that it was great. Gu Xiaoman pauses between words and asks, so their younger brother saw a very small Sea of Kai. Manhwa closed her eyes and agreed with this. Gu Xiaoman turned around and looked at him without saying anything. Manhwa ran off her feet, and this surprised her. She jumped on Liu Sun's head and smiled while looking at him. This surprised him, and he asks fourth eldest sister what is she going to do. He's still eating. She should be careful not to drop her hair into his bowl. Manhwa licks his paw and calls to his little brother as he tries to continue eating. She says that she has something important to tell him. He should not move from his place. She waves her paw and says that he shouldn't be depressed. Even if he just saw a small Sea of Kai, she will still protect him. If anyone dares to bully him in the future, she will cut off his head. Liu Sun was touched by these words and called her fourth elder sister with tears in his eyes. He holds out a piece of cooked fish to her using chopsticks and asks if she wants some. Manhwa agreed to this and immediately snatched a piece of fish. Because of this, the fish juice fell on Liu Sun's forehead and it embarrassed him. She continues to eat, sitting on his head and splashing him. Gu Xiaoman looks at them and thinks that she should help him. Sometime later at night, Liu Sun loudly asks someone not to come near him. He sleeps on his bed and waving his arms asks who she even is. She should tell him. He gets up after waking up and asks what was that. There was a lot of tension on his face and his heartbeat was fast. Liu Sun looks at his hands and asks, was it a dream? Was it really possible that someone was chasing him in a dream? But he could not see her face clearly enough. He remembers what happened in the dream and wonders what kind of shadow it was. It was very strange. The system notifies that his reputation is 1,827 points out of 2,000 points. Liu Sun thinks that anyway, he might as well not think too much about it. Maybe it's just because he's under a lot of pressure. He went to bed and thinks that he just needs more than 100 repetition points to complete the task. That's what he has to worry about, and now he's going to sleep. After he fell asleep, Liu Sun immediately found himself in a dark place with water instead of the floor and sees a strange shadow in front of him. This surprised him very much, and he asks what is going on here. Did this happen again? The shadow took the form of a girl with a sword and attacked him. Liu Sun is scared when he sees this and asks why his dream is smoothly similar to the continuation of his previous dream. He was greatly frightened when a shadow in the form of a girl almost pierced him with its sword. He pinched his cheeks hard, and waking up, he loudly said that he should wake up right now. 2 large marks appeared on his face because he pinched himself, and he asks what was that just now? Are these recurring dreams, and is he hallucinating? Liu Sun goes back to bed and says that he should get a good night's sleep no matter what happens. He lay down on his bed and fell asleep almost immediately. Once in a dream, he again saw a shadow in front of him in the form of a girl. Liu Sun pinches his cheeks again and says that it is still in his dream. Is he really confused? This cannot really happen. Having said this, he immediately went back to bed and immediately fell asleep. Finding himself in a dream, he again saw a shadow in front of him in the form of a girl with a sword. Liu Sun is embarrassed by this and says that he now definitely believes that ghosts are haunting him. He begins to run away from the shadow in the form of a girl, watching as she chases him. He took it more seriously and thinks it can't be a coincidence. He will never have the same dream over and over again. There is now only one possible explanation. He stopped and, waving his hand, said that the system should check this. In the system window, it is written that this is the will of the sword ghost. The task has started. Gu Xiaoman wants to train him to use his sword. Is he willing to accept this task? Liu Sun looks at this system window while the ghost pierced his body with a sword. He smiles and says that now he sees what is happening here. It explains everything. Since second elder sister wants to help him, he cannot disappoint her. He accepts this task. The system notifies that hard mode is enabled. Gu Xiaoman's ghost pulls his sword out of his body and takes a fighting stance. She quickly approaches him, about to stab him with her sword. During the night, Liu's son was killed in various ways. His body was pierced by the ghost sword from different sides and directions. He was killed by the shadow assassin a total of 36 times. Liu's son woke up in his bed and put his hand on his head. He got up and asked with a joyful look, "Is it really already dawn? He can still last a few rounds." Manhwa hands him something that she eats herself and asks if he would like some. Liu's son says that he feels good as it is. He thinks he was stabbed with a sword all the time last night. It was really exciting, but now he's feeling a little dizzy. Suddenly, Manhwa ran up to him and put what she was eating into his mouth. She lifts his head, grabbing his hair, and says that he needs to eat, and he must eat 2 portions. She dusts off her hands and says that these gummies are good for him, but he can only eat 2 a day and he shouldn't be greedy. Liu's son swallowed it and thinks that these gummies are definitely not ordinary ones. He feels very cool when he chews it, and after swallowing it, he feels rested and invigorated. It was not in vain that he prepared fish for her. Manhwa says that as the night passed, she calculated that he received a total of 36 blows with the sword. It's hard to deal with the will of second senior sister's sword, right? Liu's son asks how did she know about this. Manhwa leans towards him and says that she knows everything about what is happening here. Does he want her to go and ask second elder sister to revoke her sword will for him? She thinks that second elder sister doesn't want to listen to her at all, but it doesn't matter. What she wants is to just see him piteously begging him. Liu's son says that he actually has a bit of a difficult question, which he would like to discuss with her. Manhwa thinks that this is what she wanted. He should just start piteously begging her. Liu's son coughed and asked, will second elder sister's sword dissipate over time? Manhwa says that of course this is not true. She wonders why this is different from what she imagined. Liu's son says that's really great then. Manhwa was embarrassed by this and thinks that he was tortured all night. Maybe he's addicted to torment. Does he like it? Liu's son thinks that in this case, he might be able to retain the will of second senior sister's sword for 30 days. The system window says that he received a reward for completing the task, 1 sword talent point. He thinks that he should develop this sword talent. He gets out of bed and says they have to go. He will make something to eat for her. Manhwa was very happy about this and said it was cool. Liu's son leaves the house and asks, is today a special holiday? She says that today is the day of the sect's family reunion. All the disciples with their families left the sect today. Liu's son looks around and says that this explains everything. Manhwa says that for the disciples without families, the demon sect is their home, and they also want to celebrate the holiday a little. Liu's son thinks that indeed, this is exactly what these sky dust cultivators are. They're just people with a slightly longer lifespan and supernatural powers. However, they still want to reunite with their family during festivals. This is also the reason why so many people choose to immerse themselves in this virtual world filled with worldly joys and warmth. Compared to reality, where people are cold and indifferent, illusion can actually bring more joy. People walking in the city say that today is the sect's family reunion day, and her son is returning today to celebrate the holiday. Her old friend returns too. She heard that she might soon be transferred to the internal department. Her daughter was accepted by the elder as a disciple. In the tea house, someone says that at that very moment Zhang San tore off Lai Zai's undershirt. Seeing her beautiful and strong legs, he could not control himself. He was ready. Confused people look in amazement at the person telling this story and say that the most exciting part is ahead. He must continue to tell the story. How would he comment on this story in this way? This is such a shame for scientists. The guy who told the story says that if they want to know what will happen next to Zhang San and Lai Roman 11, they can stay tuned until the next episode. Another guy hits a gong and says that if they liked the story, they can give them some financial support. If they don't have a lot of money, they can just borrow a little. The people got angry, and when they left, they said that they would not give him any money. He didn't like this story at all. Since there will be a next episode, he will just give them money next time. They must leave here now. They'll be back here for the story tomorrow. The narrator with an elegant look continues to drink his tea, and the guy with the gong says that today they have not received any money again. They should really give up this habit of cutting the story the way he wants. The narrator goes outside and says that telling stories is just his hobby. It doesn't matter whether he can make money by telling stories or not. The guy following him asks, then maybe they will return to the sect. The narrator asks, should they go back there? The guy asks, aren't they going back to visit their little brother? The narrator continues walking down the street and notices something that attracts his attention. He goes to the mirror and asks, is this really necessary? Is he very nice to look at or something? He examines his reflection in the mirror and says that he simply has 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose and a mouth, like any of them. The guy thinks he's really vain because he always talks about everyone's appearance. He chose Shen Yan as the sect leader only because he is short and bald. Isn't this true? The narrator comes up to the people who are playing Go and says that he really made a bad move. Having said this, he ran away from the people who got angry and shouted after him. Doesn't he know that true gentlemen watch others play without saying a word? The narrator runs past the guy he was walking with and says that it was a really bad move anyway. The guy sighs and thinks that since he didn't have much fun, they can stay here a little longer before returning to the sect. The narrator asks, is he following them? This move was really bad. The guy catches up with him and says that he is not following them. The narrator says that then they can continue. Some people seem to be playing ahead of the game. They need to join them. The guy asks him to wait and says he doesn't understand why he set such a rule for admitting students. The narrator turns out to be the teacher in the small office, Zio Shujai. He says that when he stood at the peak of a newbie guide that day, he didn't think too long and just introduced this rule. The guy is embarrassed and thinks that judging by the expression on his face, he can tell that he is lying again. These 3 conditions must have a deeper meaning. It seems that after returning to the sect, he needs to thoroughly investigate the younger brother who has fulfilled the 3 conditions. This guy, striving for knowledge, is the 3rd older brother in a small office. Some time later, Liu Sun walks through the bamboo forest and calls for the 4th elder sister. Coming closer to her, he asks why the 2nd eldest sister suddenly left her will of the sword to him. Can she stop penetrating him next time? Mountainbay says that maybe she saw that he just had a small sea of Kai when he advanced to the 2nd level of the Kai eating technique, so she planned to train him more. Liu Sun asks, then how much of her power did she use for this sword will? Mountainbay asks, he wonders how much power she spent. He will find out in the future. Liu Sun looks at her with suspicion and wonders if it could be just a tiny particle. They arrive at the right place and Mountainbay loudly tells the 2nd eldest sister that they have prepared delicious food for her again. Liu Sun bowed to her and said that he was grateful to 2nd elder sister for her guidance. He smiles and thinks that it seems like she never said a word to him. Should he try talking to her today? He bowed again and thanked her for it. Gu Xiaoman nodded and stammered that she heard it. Liu Sun hands her the tray and says she should try this. This is the noodle stew he made today. Gu Xiaoman took the bowl of noodles and thought it smelled really good. She picked up the noodles with chopsticks and starts tasting it. She was very surprised and said that it was very tasty. Liu Sun looks at her from the side and thinks that he vaguely feels that she is somehow cute. Gu Xiaoman begins to emit strong energy after tasting this dish and her sword will begins to dissipate. Liu Sun noticed this energy emanating from her and wondered if this was really her will of the sword. He is very surprised when he notices something strange happening nearby. He notices a faint aura coming from her hair clip and wonders if she used it as a sword. At first, the highest level in Heavenly Dust World Online was 60, and at that time, no player had ever seen the 2nd elder sister act. Hence the question arises. How strong is she? She uses a hair clip as her sword, and with the help of this sword, she kept him awake last night. I wonder what she looks like when she takes off her hair clip and her hair flutters in the air, after some time while climbing the mountain. Liu Sun is very out of breath and tells 4th elder sister that she should stop. He was too exhausted to climb any further. He breathes heavily and says that he is too tired. Mountainbay turns to him and asks if this is all he can do. Don't people boast that they never get tired? When he came closer, she asked, very little time has passed, and he is already so tired. Liu Sun is embarrassed by this and wonders, does she really know what she is saying? Mountainbay sticks his tongue out at him to tease him. She starts running even faster and says that she is going to go back and sleep now. Because she was not looking at the road, she crashed into a person who was walking in front of her. The person she crashed into was Shen Yan. He says that he greets them, Master's aunt and Master's uncle. Mountainbay got angry and tells this bald man that he should watch where he is going. The next time he gets in her way, she will bite him. She holds her cheek, which is turned red due to the collision, and silently looks back. She gets angry at Shen Yan and says that he should remember her words. Next time she will bite him. Liu Sun approached him and asked the sect leader if he needed something from him. Shen Yan asks how he knows that he came here for him. Liu Sun asks, does that mean he is here because of the 4th elder sister? Does he want to go fishing with her, or maybe look for birds' nests? None of these options seem to match the identity of the cult leader. Shen Yan laughed and said that he really knows her very well. He's right. He came here for him. I wonder if he wants to share. He took out a bag of spiritual stones and asks how big the Sea of Kai he saw. If he tells him, he can have it all. Liu Sun waved his hand and refused to answer this question. Shen Yan was embarrassed by this and laughed and said that he was right. How could he just ask such a personal question? In fact, there is something else he came here for. Liu Sun looks at him and thinks that he can see from his face that he is feeling very embarrassed now. Shen Yan says that the outer sect elders are planning to organize some sort of special training for outer disciples. Is he interested in this? Liu Sun asks, with his limited strength, can he still join the training? Shen Yan agrees and says that the training this time is relatively simple. It's just a simple drawing. Most external students will participate in the training. Suddenly, a system window appears in front of Liu Sun's face, and this surprised him a little. The system notifies that the task has been started. He must take part in the sect's training and draw for 5 minutes. The reward for the task is from 1,000 to 5,000 experience points. Liu Sun was very happy when he saw the reward for the task in the form of 5,000 experience points. He thinks that he will get 5,000 experience points just by drawing for 5 minutes. Something is definitely wrong here. He lost so much blood that night, and the Kai eating technique only gave him 20 experience points for it. But now he can gain at least 1,000 experience points just by drawing with a pen. Is it true? He asks the sect leader if the training is only about drawing, and that is all. Shen Yan agrees and says that the brush used for painting belongs to the teacher. Liu Sun thought about it and thought it was the teacher's brush. Then this explains everything. Maybe ordinary people can't even pick it up, but at least there is no danger. He will accept this task for now and see how it goes further. He agrees and says that he accepts this task. More precisely, he will join the training. Shen Yan took a step forward and said that was good. Then he must follow him. He slipped and started to fall when Liu Sun said that he had just run all the way here, and now his legs were a little weak. Sometime later, he flies into bubbles of energy created by Shen Yan, who flies on a sword next to him and thinks that this is what it feels like to fly. He regrets that he can only experience this today. He looks down somewhere and thinks that he is heading towards Lai Lai. Liu Sun notices a floating island shaped like a sheath for a huge sword and takes notice. He thinks that no matter how many times he looks at this mountain, he will still think that it looks like a scabbard. Shen Yan asks, is he worried about the appearance of the rookie guide peak? Then does he know who did it? Liu Sun looks at it and asks, did someone do this? He thinks that he must be so strong that he even destroyed a mountain peak. Shen Yan says he is right. The rookie Nid's peak was transformed into its current form after a single blow from a human sword. Liu Sun looks at him and asks if it was the teacher who struck that blow. Shen Yan says that this is not true, it was the founder of the demonic sect. He is the teacher's senior student and also his teacher. Liu Sun looked at him doubtfully and asked if this meant that the demon sect only had 2 generations of disciples. Shen Yan is embarrassed by this question and says loudly that he should just pay attention to the key meaning. He calmed down and coughed to clear his throat. The key point is that his teacher cut the mountain with one sword and became unrivaled in the world. If his master is still here, then none of the swordsmen on this mountain will be able to become number 1 in fencing. Liu Sun looked at him and asked, does he mean that his older brother is the number 1 swordsman in the world? Then where is he now? Shen Yan says that indeed, his teacher is the number 1 swordsman in the world, but right now he is in seclusion and training alone. Liu Sun asks, is he training alone? He wonders, in his previous life, the game did not have such a setting, right? Shen Yan agrees and says that he is looking for a way to break through. If he fails, he will remain in seclusion for the rest of his life and never appear again. Staying in solitude means either death or breakthrough. These unfortunates from the Mountain of Myriads of Swords and the Mountain of One Sword continue to try to find out whether his teacher is still alive in this world. They care very much about the empty title of the best in fencing. Liu Sun asks, he just said that elder brother was the first leader of the demon sect. Then what about the teacher? What is his place in the sect? Shen Yan says that strictly speaking, he is a traveling cultivator. Even so far he has not joined any sect, so he does not belong to their sect. Liu Sun says that this explains why the demon sect's actions don't seem evil at all. Shen Yan looks at him and thinks that it turns out that he didn't care about what he just said. He hides his intense anger and thinks that he seems to lack strength and insight, which prevents him from realizing how incredible his teacher is. In such a case, he must take responsibility for the explanation to him. He will not allow anyone to be unaware of how powerful his master is. He points his finger and tells Uncle Master that he should look there. Then his teacher cut off the top with one blow of his sword. The remaining half of his sword kai is still at the top of the mountain, and many sword masters come to secretly observe this. Liu's son looked at the place he pointed to and asked, "Is this true?" Shen Yan agrees and happily says that they often gather there to observe the sword kai. Liu's son looks at it and asks, "Why does this place look so short and flat, as if someone had cut it in half?" Shen Yan looks at him and says that he has really sharp eyes. This mountain was cut by him. His nose has grown very much, and he says that these sword masters are trying to learn something from his master's sword kai. However, why do they still stand so high? Liu's son smiled evilly and said that he was finally starting to act like a demon sect leader. No one can ride it. They should all resign. Since these sword masters always come here to look at the sword kai, they may not only be here for the spectacle, but also to comprehend the sword kai. I wonder if he can take a look at the sword kai. He asks if he can take a look at the remaining half of the sword kai left by the elder brother. Shen Yan says that of course it is. Whenever he gets confused during cultivation, he will also come here to observe the sword kai. However, it will only allow him to look once, and he should not be greedy for more. Liu's son asks what will happen if he stares for too long. Shen Yan says that when he looks at the sword kai, it also starts looking at him. If the sword kai looks at him, he will die. Liu's son doubts his words and asks, will he die just because this looks at him? He thinks he has resurrection coins, so he can't really die. This could be a great opportunity for him to better understand sword kai. Shen Yan asks, so he still wants to look at it? Liu's son says that of course, even if it means death, he still wants to see it. Shen Yan sends his energy into his head and says that he will risk his life to protect him. Liu's son was transported to another place and thinks that this place is different from the previous one. He notices that there is a glow of light there. He looks into the gap between the stone walls and wonders if the remaining half of the sword's kai could be there inside. Looking inside, he notices a very strong flow of energy that destroys the earth underneath and wonders what happened here. Could anyone really do something like this? Liu's son notices a very fast flow of energy heading towards him and thinks about it. What's happening? Is it really looking at him? A stream of energy begins to swirl above his head, releasing strong currents of air. This stream of energy flies up and disappears completely. Liu's son is embarrassed by this and wonders if it just ran away from him. He looks at the place where this energy was and does not notice the hand of the spirit that is reaching out to him from behind. Suddenly Shen Yan pulls him through a portal into the real world. He breathes heavily and asks the owner's uncle, did he get anything? He is trying to catch his breath due to fatigue, and Liu's son carefully looks at something next to him. The system window says that he received an excellent opportunity and received 1 sword talent point. He has the second level, a maximum of 10 points of charisma, a talent for wielding a sword of 1 point. Liu's son wonders if he got special attribute points just by looking at the sword kai. Shen Yan notices the bright glow emanating from him and thinks that he has truly understood the art of swordsmanship. He is surprised when he notices something and wonders if it could be that he has an innate talent for fencing. He sees strong streams of energy emanating from Liu's son's head and wonders if he is the natural sword master from the legend. He stands with his eyes closed as streams of strong energy shoot out from his forehead. Shen Yan looks at what is happening in surprise and tries to say something about it. He covers himself with his hands because the emitted energy was very bright. Liu's son releases a very bright stream of energy into the sky, which illuminates everything around at a very great distance. People who practiced in the mountains with weapons notice this pillar of strong and bright energy and notice that their swords begin to vibrate. An ominous sign appears in the sky. Is something serious going on in the sect? Lai Lai also noticed this bright column of energy and looks at it. She thinks that in this direction, apparently, is the back mountain where Liu's son is now. Someone laughs and says loudly that they should congratulate. Their master uncle has realized the heart of the sword. All the students begin to rejoice at this and shout loudly, "Uncle Master." Lai Lai rejoices with the others and looks towards the huge pillar of energy. When the flow of energy ended, Liu's son opened his eyes. In the system window in front of him, it is written that he has a second level of 10 points of charisma, 1 point of sword talent. Note, he realized the heart of the sword. Several people have gathered around him and bow to him. Luo Wonkyu put her hand on his shoulder and said that she congratulates the master uncle. Now he has realized the heart of the sword. Shen Yan bows to him and says that among the disciples of the Mountain of Myriads of Swords and the Mountain of One Sword at this level, no one has ever been able to understand the heart of the sword. He is truly the first person of all ages to understand this. Everyone who gathered here begins to laugh, and this embarrassed Liu Sun. He thinks the system just added a small note. Why are they all so happy about this? He notices a system alert that says that the reputation task has been completed. His reputation is 2,333 points out of the required 2,000 points. Liu Sun begins to laugh with the others as he looks at the system window. He thinks that it turns out that understanding the heart of the sword helped him increase the amount of reputation. This is truly something to be happy about. Player Liu Sun doesn't really understand what the sword heart means to cultivators. After all, he gets experience points just by cheating in the game. The system notifies that the task has been completed. He received 10,000 experience points and 1 special attribute point that can be used freely. Liu Sun thinks that 10,000 experience points is enough to upgrade to level 5, but the most amazing thing is the special attribute point. He is going to re-emphasize the talent of swordsmanship. I wonder if they'll go crazy because they were too happy to see it. Shen Yan approaches him and speaks to his uncle master. That he would like to know if he would like to return to the back mountain now for further cultivation. About this outer sect test, how about? He doesn't have time to finish his question and stops. Liu Sun tells the sect leader that everything is fine. He still wants to join the testing. He wonders what kind of joke this is. It's just an episode. This cannot prevent him from completing large tasks. Shen Yan nodded his head and said that everything was fine. He thinks this guy is quite talented, and it will be great if he learns something new during the test. After some time, in a square high in the mountains, someone tells the uncle master that this is a testing location. All the disciples bowed and said that they greeted them, great uncle master, the sect leader, and all the respected elders and masters. Liu Sun waved his hand and said that he was here to take the test, like the rest of them. There is no need for formalities. All the students look at him happily and say that he really doesn't put on airs. He is handsome and easygoing, truly the ideal man. If he were a girl, he would definitely fall in love with him. Shen Yan turns around and says that they should pay attention. The test will start soon. As elders, shouldn't they leave here now? The people standing next to him tell the sect leader that they don't think they should leave here now. How about finding a place to have tea together? It's right. They haven't had tea together for a long time, have they? Gongshu Panyu says that they just had tea together yesterday. This confused everyone who was here. Yu Heshin looks at him and asks why he is so straightforward. Shen Yan also looks at him and asks, doesn't he want to see how Uncle Master behaves during the test? Gongshu Panyu raised his head and said of course. He pauses his sentence and says he wants it. Everyone else looks at him and feels different emotions. Yu Hongshin pretends to be caring and level-headed and says that then they should go and have tea together. They all leave and Liu Sun hears Lai Lai calling his name and pays attention to it. She walks through the crowd of students and says that it is her. She waves her hand at him, and the embarrassed girls who stand around her think that this is the great Uncle Master. He's still incredible. Liu Sun smiled slightly when he saw her in the crowd of other students. He beckons her and says that she should come to him. Lai Lai was surprised when she heard this and just looked at him for a while. She tries to walk through the crowd of students and apologetically asks them to move away. She walked into the middle of the square and stood in front of him while the other students looked at them with reddened faces. Lai Lai is embarrassed and says that they haven't seen him for a long time. Liu Sun asks she used to want to capture him and use him as a vessel for cultivation, but now she is shy. He starts walking towards her and asks if she still wants to use him as her cultivation vessel. He leaned towards her, stroked her head, and looked straight into her eyes, which made Lai Lai feel even more embarrassed. She embarrassedly looked away and said that she wouldn't dare. Liu Sun looks at her face and thinks that although she said that she wouldn't dare to do it, her impatient expression says otherwise. He is a real connoisseur of faces. She really wants his body. Kyushui approaches them and says that she is the presiding elder for this trial. Liu Sun looked at her, and Lai Lai, out of extreme embarrassment, turned away from him in the other direction and covered her face with her hands. Kyushui points his finger at her face and asks Uncle Master if he wants to go on stage first or prefers to watch first. Liu Sun says that he will take the stage first and set the tone for everyone. He looks away and says that if he watches from the side, they might start to get nervous. People admire him very much and say that he is so willing to meet people. That's right, he is so attentive that he always thinks about them. Liu Sun looks at the window of the system with his reputation and thinks that they will all just become his die-hard fans. His reputation depends on all of them. Kyushui points to a table with paper and a brush, and they say that everything is fine. Uncle Master must prepare for this test. Liu Sun sat down at the table and sees the system window, in which it is written that one sheet of very large low-grade talisman paper. He thinks there is nothing special about the talisman paper, so the focus of this test is on the tassel. Kyushui says that this brush was bought by a teacher from a small town for writing and drawing. Their test today is to take that brush and write or draw on that big talisman paper. They can paint whatever they want, and whoever can use the brush the longest will be rewarded with a jade green tablet. The disciples were happy to see this and said that the jade green pill is a treasure that is worth several dozen days of cultivation. It's just drawing. He can do it all day. Drawing is his specialty. Yesterday, he even drew on his bed. Is he talking about urinating on his bed? Liu Sun looks at Lai Lai and wishes her luck later. She nodded at him and agreed. Kyushui tells Uncle Master that the test officially starts now. Liu Sun looks at the brush and thinks that the system should check this. The system notifies that this is a tattered brush of the 20th level, which was used by the teacher, and this was presented along with the inkstone. Note, this brush already has spirit in it. Liu Sun looks at it and wonders, this brush has reached the 20th level and there is spirit in it. I wonder how formidable his teacher could be. He hasn't met him yet. He reaches out to touch the brush and thinks that he might as well try it. He hopes that it will not be as heavy as Thor's hammer, which he will not be able to lift. Liu Sun picked up this brush and thinks that it feels surprisingly light. He's about to dip his brush into the ink and thinks that this test doesn't seem too difficult. When he dipped the brush into ink and tried to lift it, his hand began to tremble and stopped. He tries to lift it with all his might and thinks that it is getting heavier. Because he tries too hard to lift this hand, veins begin to appear on his face, and he thinks that he does not believe that with his strong arms he cannot lift an ordinary hand. Liu Sun begins to wave his hand with his hand and directs his energy into it. He tries to hold this brush, directing his energy there, and thinks that he managed to lift it. The students look at him with admiration and think that he is now their favorite idol, because it's really hard. Liu Sun looks at the brush with an evil smile and thinks that he can't embarrass himself in front of them because he needs to gain more reputation. He points his brush at the paper and thinks that it won't be difficult to draw with this anyway. The students continue to admire him and think he is amazing. Even if his hand shakes a lot, he is still so capable. Could it be because he has a strong will? He is truly calm and persistent. The elders watch him through the window and say that he actually has vitality. They look at him with a satisfied look, drink tea, and say that indeed, the person chosen by the teacher is not an ordinary person. I wonder how long he can hold out. Liu Sun paints with a concentrated expression and thinks that he now understands that the purpose of this brush is to test whether he can control his spiritual kai. His hand is shaking, and he thinks until then, as he smoothly releases his spiritual kai. He did not finish his thought and ran his brush over a sheet of paper. Suddenly it stopped and people asked what was going on. Why did he stop moving? Maybe he's thinking about something. Liu Sun feels that his brush has become very heavy, and someone asks if he is trying to paint a masterpiece or something like that. He struggles to hold the brush and thinks it's not that he doesn't want to move. He just can't move the thing at all. Should he move it with his spiritual kai again? Looks like he'll have to give it his all. He begins to collect energy around himself and directs it into the brush. His hand has stopped shaking and energy gathers around the brush in his hand. Kyushui waved her hand and said that everyone should watch carefully. The beginning of the test begins the moment this brush touches the paper. This brush already has its own spirit, and this cannot be controlled solely by brute force. Liu Sun thinks that he cannot rely on brute force alone. Could it be that this time he doesn't need to forcefully manipulate it with spiritual kai, but instead needs to guide it? Then he will try to direct it. It should move. It just has to start moving. The brush begins to move slowly on the piece of paper, and Liu Sun thinks that he really can't force it, but he can gently guide it. Now he understands it. This test is actually aimed at testing the precise control over the spiritual kai of the disciples in the sect. It is not intended to test brute strength, but to precisely control spiritual kai. In that case, he knows what he needs to do now. The elders observing him say that it seems that he is even smarter than they thought. They didn't expect him to understand the purpose of the test so quickly. However, it is not easy to precisely control spiritual kai. This tests careful control of spiritual kai. Without the experience of releasing spiritual kai, a person will not last long. Liu Sun thinks this is very strange. He had never used spiritual kai before, but why did he feel more and more proficient at controlling it? He remembers training in a dream with his second older sister and thinks that it was because of the training that took place not so long ago. In that case, he cannot let her down. Kiyu Shui looks at him and thinks that this is not only a test of spiritual kai control, but also a serious test of mental strength. Moreover, his spiritual kai is quickly depleted. If this continues, his spiritual kai will run out very soon. The system notifies that his energy is already running low. The first part of the task is completed. Current progress on the task is 20%. He gained 1,000 experience points. Liu Sun finds it difficult to control his hand and thinks that he has just finished the first part. He now feels very tired and will soon use up his spiritual kai. He continues to draw using the last of his energy and uses his free hand to wipe the sweat from his face. Luo Wonkyu looks at him and says that he did very well, but unfortunately, due to his superficial cultivation base and insufficient spiritual kai, he had to reach his limit. Liu Sun chuckled and thought that as a player, he would never leave a task half completed. The elders, along with the sect leader, are surprised when they notice something strange. Kiyu Shui was also shocked to notice this and says that he was able to break through. All the students were shocked when they heard this news and looked at him with even greater surprise. Liu Sun is overcome with strong energy due to the fact that he has increased his level to the 3rd. He smiles and thinks that drawing crooked lines all the time is not interesting. He wants to see if he can draw a straight line. He drew a straight line on a piece of paper and thinks that it doesn't seem that difficult. The elders were shocked when they saw this, and one of them says loudly, then they should quickly look, he just drew a straight line. How is this even possible? Is he really a genius? Liu Sun smiled and wondered, so this is how he controls his spiritual kai. He wants to try and see where his limit is. Thus, Liu Sun begins to test his own limit and draw madly on paper. After 1 hour, he continues to draw with a cheerful expression on his face, and people say that he has continued to draw for an hour. What kind of monster is he? What's even more terrifying is that he had 2 breakthroughs right on the spot. Liu Sun put the brush back in place, looks at what he drew on the paper, and thinks that this will be enough. The system task only required drawing for 25 minutes, but he painted for a full 60 minutes. Getting up from the table, he goes to the crowd of amazed students and says that he has finished. They can now start the test. They look at him in surprise and say that he is so wonderful. He passes through a crowd of students who say that he is truly a prodigy. They want to be like him. Liu Sun suddenly felt sick and thought it was so exciting, but he couldn't bear it anymore. He feels that he is dying. This test nearly took his life. The students look at how he staggers and wonder if something is wrong, why his steps seem unsteady. It feels as if he is completely exhausted and will soon fall to the ground. Liu Sun touched his forehead and thought that if he fainted now, his journey as their beloved idol would end here. As a man, he must hold on, no matter how weak he is now. Kiyu Shui looks at him and thinks that it seems that even such an outstanding and talented person as Master Uncle would still be left exhausted after drawing for an hour. Lai Lai is worried looking at him and wonders if he is going to faint. Even if he falls, he better not hurt his face. Liu Sun starts to get nervous and thinks that he should do something now. Is there anything that can help him cheat and achieve this? He had just become their favorite idol. He remembers something and thinks about it. He took out a small object and thinks that this is the marmalade that the 4th elder sister gave him. After eating this, his energy was restored very quickly, and Liu Sun thinks that this jujube has a cool taste when he chews it, and after eating it, he feels rested and invigorated. Had she already foreseen that he might exhaust himself? He remembers Mountain Bay and thinks that he doesn't think she could have thought of all this with her limited brain capacity. He turns around and thinks everything is fine. It's time to come back and show them how energetic he looks now. Liu Sun tells everyone that they must be careful when taking this test. It will be very useful for them. People were surprised that he didn't look too exhausted. Kyushui was surprised to hear this and thinks that she can't believe that he is okay. Lai Lai is very happy about this and thinks it's cool that he didn't hurt his face. Liu Sun is confused by her reaction and wonders why her expression is different from others. What is she thinking about now? Kyushui coughed to get the students' attention and said that they should continue the test. Lai Lai will be next. She was very surprised when she heard her name and was not ready for it. The students are happy and say that Uncle Master just tried very hard. They can't keep up with him. She can handle it. No matter what, he must draw today until he runs out of energy. Lai Lai stood in front of the table with a piece of paper and a brush and looked around. Liu Sun smiles as she poses like an idol and says that she just has to do her best. Lai Lai is determined and thinks she has made her decision. She is about to trace Liu Sun's drawing. He is confused when he sees her and wonders what she is doing. Does she have to trace his drawing with hers? She's really bossy. Lai Lai draws and thinks that she should continue because she can do it. Some time later, she felt weak and someone says that she had been drawing for more than 15 minutes. Lai Lai looks at the piece of paper and thinks it's great. Now Liu Sun's drawing is inside her drawing. On the piece of paper, there was a huge spot that he had drawn and a thin but neater line that Lai Lai had drawn. The students look at her in surprise and say that she really has 8 circles of talent. It seemed to him that before she was just joking, but in fact, she gave it her all. They start to panic and say that if he doesn't try his best later, he will definitely embarrass himself. He won't lose to his little brother. Dream also doesn't want his older brother to look down on him. He will take 3rd place. Great Uncle Master and Lai Lai will occupy the top 2 positions. No one will be able to compete for these places. At the same moment, Lai Lai begins to fall due to loss of strength and thinks that it was cool. Kyushui stands not far from her and notices what is happening to her. She caught her in a sphere created from energy. She thinks that she tensed up too much. All of her spiritual kai was depleted. She looks towards the students and notices Liu Sun, who waves at her. She continues to support the sphere with her energy and thinks that she does not have time to take care of it now. With the same success, she could have left her in the care of her Uncle Master. She carried Lai Lai and Liu Sun, caught her to prevent her from falling again. He hands her the marmalade and says that if she eats this, she will feel better. This will help her recover. Lai Lai eats what he gave her and thinks that this marmalade tastes very sweet. When he put marmalade in her mouth, she bit his finger. Liu Sun is embarrassed by this and says that it is his hand, it should stop. The elders were confused when they saw this, and Shen Yan asks what is going on there. Sometime later, the elders were disappointed, and the sect leader asks, what is happening now? Many disciples were lying on the ground with incredibly strong fatigue, and Kyushui carried their bodies in spheres away from the table. Shen Yan says loudly that this is just an ordinary test for senior students. How did it turn into something so intense and bloody? Uncle Master really took this test to the extreme. Kyushui passes by many tired students and says that the result of this test is already clear. She looks at the remaining students on their feet and says that 1st place in this test goes to Lai Lai. Liu Sun, who was helping her hold on, smiled, but she was surprised by this and asked, did she win? He says of course it's her. How could her great uncle, the master, compete for awards with his juniors? The students are happy to hear this and say that he really thinks big. What a broad outlook he has. He wants to be someone like him. The system notifies that his reputation is increasing. Liu Sun thinks that it seems that his place as their favorite idol is becoming more and more stable. Everyone just admires him without hesitation, and he gets more reputation. Lai Lai took the box of pills to the applause of Kyushui, and still not understanding what was happening, she wondered if she really took 1st place. Liu Sun walked up to her and said with a smile that she had done a good job. Lai Lai was very embarrassed and blushed when she heard this and thanked him. Shen Yan holds several bags of spiritual stones and tells everyone that he told them that she would win. Do they believe him now? He smiles looking at Liu Sun and thinks that he really deserves to be his student. The elders standing next to him look at the students with glowing eyes. Shen Yan became embarrassed when he noticed their glances. Although he is sober, he is quite stingy, and he thinks that it looks like they also need his student. Compared to those who have sufficient resources, a good attitude towards learning, stable methods of self-improvement, and who do not skimp, he has no advantage at all. He needs to find a way to divert their attention and create a sense of crisis in them. He had an idea. Shen Yan tells everyone that there is something that they should wait for the teacher to return here to discuss. But it looks like the teacher won't be back soon, so they should discuss it among themselves. The elders ask, "What's the matter? What could be so serious?" Shen Yan turns to them and asks, "Then when Uncle Master jumped off the cliff, they should all have felt that invisible pressure, right?" The elders agree with him and say that besides, with his current strength, he cannot figure out who it was. Shen Yan says that the teacher doesn't care about this issue either. Aren't they worried about this? What if he appears again and poses a threat to their sect? The elders think about this and say that indeed, if he harbors evil intentions, then it will be bad. They must find a way to deal with it. They cannot allow anyone to look down on their sect. Shen Yan smiles and thinks that they all fell for it. This power is most likely released by the master during his retreat. He says they should discuss this in more detail then. He looks at Lai Lai, who smiles and thinks that he specifically chose her to be his student. He won't let anyone take her from him. Sometime later, Liu Sun sits on his bed and looks at the system window, which says that he is level 4, level up is ready, he has 12,150 experience points out of the required 3,000. Liu Sun asks, so now he has 12,150 experience points. He had gained quite a lot of experience points after completing a few tasks, he just didn't expect to use up most of it after leveling up twice. He yawns and says that he should be more frugal since he will need experience points to improve his skills in the future. He lay down on his bed and, closing his eyes, drifted off to sleep. Liu Sun once again found himself in space alone with the spirit of Gu Xiaoman. He completely forgot about it and was embarrassed when he noticed her and realized where he was. As a result, his training continued throughout the night. Liu Sun woke up exhausted, and going outside he said that last night he was killed 19 times. Mountain Bay is sitting on a hammock, eating gummies, and noticing his little brother, he asks why he looks so empty. Liu Sun holds his head and says that this is just nonsense. He still can't do a few more rounds. He eats one jelly bean and Mountain Bay asks if he has figured out the heart of the sword. What does this even look like? Liu Sun agrees, eating the gummies and saying that there was no special sensation, it was just a quick whistle. He thinks it was a whistle similar to the one that appears when he levels up. There were also a lot of bright effects, he only felt a little blinded. Mountain Bay looks at him with interest and asks what he means by whistling. Liu Sun says he can't describe it, but it seemed to him that everything happened very quickly. It happened in just a few seconds. Mountain Bay despises him for his answer and says that it was really fast. By the way, he has already understood what the heart of a sword is, although he doesn't even have a sword. Liu Sun thought about her words and looked at her silently. He bowed to the fourth eldest sister and said that he was grateful to her for giving him the sword. Mountain Bay was shocked when she heard this and could not say anything to him. She turned away from him and began to ignore him. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of Liu Sun. He wonders why the system window appeared in front of him. The system notifies that an important hint has appeared. Players participating in open beta testing will log into the system very soon. Liu Sun thought about open beta testing. He looks at the system window with a smile and wonders, will the players log in very soon? Mountain Bay jumped on his head in the form of a cat and asked why he was laughing. They need to hurry up and take the food to the second eldest sister. She wants pumpkin porridge. Liu Sun asks if she is delivering food to second elder sister or just wants to eat porridge. Sometime later, they both sit next to Gu Xiaoman after they all eat together. Mountain Bay holds his stomach and says that the pumpkin porridge was very tasty. Liu Sun looks up and thinks that these stupid players will appear soon, but he is only level 4. Its level is too low. It's really so awkward. He gets up and thinks that he should level up as quickly as possible. Liu Sun bows and tells second elder sister that he will come again to deliver food to her during the day. He thinks that cultivating is really useless, but he doesn't have time to put it off now. Gu Xiaoman sits with her eyes closed, agrees and says that she understood him. Liu Sun says with a smile that this is cool. He thinks her attitude towards him seems to have changed a little. He remembers something and says that tomorrow is the Mid-Autumn Festival. Is there anything they would both like to eat? Mountain Bay was happy to hear this and said that she always gets excited when it comes to food. Liu Sun smiles and thinks that they actually ordered quite a lot of dishes, but there is nothing wrong with that. Anyway, it's the Mid-Autumn Festival. He would cook some delicious dishes for them. Liu Sun walks through a bamboo grove and does not even suspect that from now on he is no longer alone in this world. At the same time, Manhwa happily jumps around the second eldest sister and says that their little brother is going to cook a lot of delicious dishes tomorrow. She, in the form of a cat, pressed herself to her older sister's head and says that yesterday the younger brother managed to understand the heart of the sword, but he doesn't even have a sword. Should she find a way to get him one? Gu hit her on the head and refused, saying that she should not act rashly. She must teach him her skill with the blade. Manhwa looked at her and asked if she was sure about this. He's exhausted. What if her blade nurturing skill ends up hurting him? After all, he was created by the elder brother. Gu says she just has to do it. Sometime later, Liu Sun sits in his room in a meditation position and thinks that he is going to cultivate the Kai eating technique. Suddenly, someone burst into his room, slamming the door loudly and quickly ran towards him. Manhwa pressed his face to the floor, hitting him hard, and he screamed in pain and surprise. She holds his head with one hand, and in a second she concentrates her energy and says that there is no time to explain. He must close his eyes and calm his mind. She begins to cast a spell and various symbols created from her energy appear around her. Liu Sun slightly opened one eye and noticed what was happening here. He notices a system window that says, does he want to master the skill of raising a sword? Skill level orange class. The sword cultivation skill created by the elder brother of the demon sect, who was the best swordsman in the world, was changed by Manhwa into the blade cultivation skill, and now it has returned to its original form. Liu Sun was surprised when he read this and wonders if this sword cultivation skill is actually an orange class skill. This is one of the best skills. Even in his previous life, he would never have been able to obtain such a great treasure. Why does he even doubt it? He's going to learn it. He stands surrounded by the energy of Manhwa, and the system notifies that he has 12,150 experience points out of the required 1,500 points. Level up is ready. The sword skill has been successfully mastered. The current progress is 0. Liu Sun was very surprised by this and asked, does this skill have level 0? The system notifies that he can increase the level of this skill. Liu Sun agrees to increase the level of this skill with dissatisfaction and thinks that just to reach level 0, 10,000 experience points are required, and another 1,500 are needed to increase the level. Isn't this a forced transaction? He doesn't have any other choice, does he? When he agreed to this, a very strong energy began to emanate from his body, from which Manhwa covered himself with his hands. He looks at him in surprise and says that she did not expect him to master this skill so quickly. Liu Sun continues to meditate, not paying attention to her. Manhwa says that he managed to master the sword cultivation skill in such a short time. Does he really only have one circle of talent? The skill of nurturing the sword requires that the sword be nurtured, and only a sword that is carefully cared for can wield mighty power. But now there is a certain problem. She looks at Liu Sun's tense expression and thinks that he doesn't have a sword at all. He continues to emit strong energy and thinks it is very strange. Why does he feel more pain when learning the sword cultivation skill than when cultivating? It's too painful. Strange writings begin to appear on his body, and he, who does not have a sword, has just absorbed a large amount of spiritual Kai at one time, but the spiritual Kai has nowhere to go. Now Liu Sun is experiencing pain similar to suffering in hell. It's like draining the blood from his veins and then pouring molten lava into it. He sees a heart that absorbs a large amount of energy and wonders how he got here. This is his sword heart. Spiritual Kai approaches him. He is surprised when he notices that his heart begins to change. His heart begins to burn. Liu Sun notices something in his sword heart that caught his attention, and he looks at it in surprise. He wonders why there is some kind of needle or sword in the middle of his heart. Sometime later, he opens his eyes and sees the face of Manhwa, who is looking at him intently. Liu Sun was very scared when he saw her and screamed in surprise. She climbs on him and asks if he feels that something is wrong with his body. He smiled awkwardly and asked, does she mean that he has become even more handsome? Manhwa leaves him and says that he seems to be fine. He was really lucky. He probably just failed his cultivation, but it was good that he didn't experience any negative reaction. She turns to him and says that sword skill is one of the main skills that requires gradual understanding. If he practices this without understanding it first, he may suffer great blood loss and unstable cultivation and even die. Liu Sun chuckled and said that he was not at all surprised by this. Manhwa raises her voice with a serious expression and says that he should not take this lightly. He doesn't have this valuable skill yet, so even if he practices it now, he still won't achieve any results. Liu Sun looks at her blankly and asks, "Did she say precious skill?" Manhwa pulls his hand and says that she will take him to second elder sister to examine him. If he dies, they may be left without food. Sometime later, Liu Sun sits in front of Gu Xiaoman and thinks. So a sword appeared inside his heart. This shouldn't happen. How can the human body be used to create a sword? Manhwa, who is sitting next to them, asks what happened. Did anything bad happen to him? Gu Xiaoman sits with his eyes closed and says that this is not true. She opened her eyes and said with complete seriousness that the younger brother is a born sword master. They both were surprised to hear this and ask, is he a natural-born sword master? What does it mean? Manhwa says that the founder of Sword Mountain was a natural-born swordsman, and it is believed that their elder brother is also a natural-born swordsman. As long as a person is a natural swordsman, his achievements in swordsmanship can never be low. Liu Sun is surprised by this and says that it is so impressive. He rolled his eyes and thought that he was definitely not a natural swordsman. His fencing talent is equal to only 1 point. A true natural swordsman's fencing talent must reach at least 10 points. After thinking about it, he smiled and thinks that he really is not a natural swordsman, but now he is sure of one thing. Namely, that he really is a fraud here. Gu Xiaoman says that she can go and find Master Sima and ask him for the sword. Manhwa asks why she needs a sword. Gu Xiaoman says that she wants younger brother to try it. Manhwa agrees and immediately runs away from them, leaving them here. Liu Sun looks at them and smiles and thinks that since she's going to bring him the sword, he might as well remind her not to ruin it. He tells the fourth eldest sister that she should not forget to get him something of a higher level. The higher the better. He shouts very loudly that the more the merrier. Manhwa looks at him with irritation and thinks that he really knows how to take advantage of every opportunity. Liu Sun was happy and wondered if he would finally have his own sword. After all, he is a great uncle master in the sect. After a short period of time, Manhwa returns to them, breathing heavily and carrying 2 swords on his back. She waves at them and says that she brought swords. Liu Sun also raised his hands and called her. Manhwa grabs the sword she was carrying behind her back. She throws these 2 swords emitting strong energy and says that he should just take the swords. Liu Sun was surprised when he noticed these swords and asks how it is that these 2 swords have such great power. Manhwa laughs and says that she was interested. Can he catch these 2 swords? Liu Sun gets angry and thinks that she is playing with him again. If he tries to catch it directly, he fears that he will probably be impaled to death. He concentrates the energy in his hands and thinks that, however, if he fails to catch it, then he will disgrace himself. He releases his energy forward and directs it towards the swords that fly towards him. Gu Xiaoman raises his hand and releases his energy through his palm. She stopped those swords with her energy and says that they shouldn't fool around. She stopped using her energy and the swords sank into the ground. Manhwa is embarrassed by this and says that she just wanted to see if he could catch the swords. Gu Xiaoman says that as an older sister, she must protect her younger brother. Manhwa burst into tears because of her words and says that she understood it. Liu Sun also burst into tears and thinks that second senior sister is very sweet. He is so touched by this act. Gu Xiaoman looked at them and he thinks that he is going to try out these swords. Liu Sun turns to the swords and sees the system windows, which say that this is a yellow class black sword, a medium quality magic weapon. Yellow grade purple imperial sword, high quality magic weapon. Liu Sun thinks that one sword looks ordinary and the other is spectacular, and the more spectacular one seems to be of a higher class. He reaches for the sword and thinks that he wants to start with the weaker one. He took the sword in his hands and thinks that there seems to be no problem here. Suddenly, when he touched the sword, a very strong electrical energy appeared. This greatly surprised Liu Sun, and the sword fell out of his hands. Manhwa was embarrassed by this and asked how could this happen. He wonders what is going on here. Could it be that this little sword in his heart is resisting him using other swords? He might as well try again. He walked over to another sword and grabbed the hilt. As soon as he grabbed this sword, the same thing happened and the sword flew out of his hands, and he thinks that as expected, he cannot take it. Could it be that the sword in his heart began to be jealous? Gu Xiaoman walked up to him and called Liu Sun by name. He turns to her and calls her his second older sister. She pulls out her hairpin and asks, why doesn't he try to take her sword? Her hairpin transforms into a sword, and he sees a system window with question marks. Liu Sun thinks that even the system cannot determine the class of her sword. Can he even hold it? He made up his mind and took hold of the hilt of her sword and immediately felt something strange. Suddenly, his body begins to emit very strong energy, which flies out in all directions, and his body glows with the same energy. There was a very strong explosion that threw Liu Sun high into the air, and he asks what was that. After that, he fell to the ground with a loud crash, and this greatly surprised his older sisters. He sits on the ground and thinks that it seems that this little sword in his heart still can't compete with the second elder sister's sword. He looks at his hands and asks, what are they? Does this mean that in the future he will not be able to hold a sword in his hands? He has an idea and asks how about he try holding the sword with his foot. Manhwa leans towards him and asks if he could be a little more normal in this situation. She examines him from different angles and asks why he still can't hold a sword. He's a natural swordsman, isn't he? Liu Sun was upset about this and says that maybe he just wasn't suited to be a sword master in the first place. Manhwa looks at him with concern and thinks that he might lose self-confidence this way. She sat down next to him and putting her hand on his shoulder, she said that everything was fine. They can wait until the teacher returns here. He will surely have a solution. He is capable of anything. When she was still a little cat, he even helped her through the transformation. He is affectionate with everyone except those he doesn't like, which are overly attractive men. She was embarrassed when she realized this and looked at Liu Sun with great surprise. He turned to her and looked at her with confusion, and Manhwa was embarrassed when she noticed this. She turned away from him with great embarrassment and thinks that he is just an overly attractive man. Liu Sun stood up and Gu Xiaoman asks, why don't he try to fight with others? Maybe this could work. He asks second elder sister, she wants to see how the little sword in his heart will react during the fight, right? Manhwa's eyes lit up, and she says that she will fight him. Liu Sun looked at her blankly and asked why she wanted to fight him. Gu Xiaoman closed her eyes and said that he could fight with an external student who practices swordsmanship. Manhwa says everything is fine. She brought Lai Lai here very quickly and says that she has come. Manhwa holds her in his arms, and she calls Liu Sun Great Uncle Master with a joyful expression. He says she came just in time. He needs her to help him with something. Lai Lai stands up and asks what he needs help with. Liu Sun says that she should take out her sword and then strike him hard. Lai Lai walked up to him, put her hand on his forehead, and asked if he was okay. Liu Sun removed her hand and said in absolute seriousness that he was fine and that he meant it. She should try to stab him. Lai Lai stepped back from him and agreed to this. She releases strong energy, taking out her sword, and says that she will use all her strength. He must be careful. Liu Sun was calm and says that she should hit him with all her strength. Lai Lai starts running towards him, about to strike. She pointed her sword towards him, intending to stab him with the sword. Suddenly, a barrier of strong energy appeared around Liu Sun, protecting him from this attack. Is Li trying to break through this barrier and wondering if she can't break through this? Does he have some kind of shield that blocks her attack? She screamed as she was violently pushed away by the barrier of energy and thrown back. Manhwa caught her and tells her that she should be careful. Liu Sun says this is interesting. This little sword of his can withstand any sword that comes close to him. He wonders, doesn't that mean he activated a permanent domain without a sword?